Good morning, everyone. I will call to order the Marine Water Board meeting of April 16, 2024. Terry, could we have roll call, please?
Yes, good evening. Director Larry Russell,
Here.
Director Monty Schmidt,
Here.
Director Jed Smith,
Here.
Vice President Matt Sampson,
Here.
and President Ranjiv Kush.
Here. Do we have a motion to adopt today's agenda?
So moved. Second.
Do we have any public comments on the agenda?
Not on the agenda.
Okay.
Yes, Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
Vice President Sampson,
Yes.
Director Kush.
Aye. Moving on to any public comments that are on items not on the agenda.
Yes, we do have one, Mr. Phil Sauter.
Good evening. In last week's Marin Water email, our communications team did a great job of explaining why conservation is important, even in times of plenty. There was also a follow-up paragraph on increasing water supply and resiliency, and it seems there's an opportunity to link the two together by emphasizing that conservation is also a form of water supply, and that the more we conserve, the less we need more expensive water supply options. With the population of Marin steady and even declining over the past year, it's become clear that our search for additional water supply is to enable a minority of super users to continue maintaining water-thirsty landscapes into the future. On the one hand, we encourage users to conserve potable water, and on the other hand, we go looking for additional expensive supply sources so that some super users won't have to conserve. The cost of these supply alternatives came alive for me at the last board meeting when one of the conveyance alternatives approached $300 million. And not because we're short of drinking water, but because we want to keep using more than half our potable water outdoors, even though we know the next drought will stop that wasteful luxury in its tracks. So it's not like additional water supply will protect our lawns forever. They'll be protected only until the next drought. That's a lot of investment for a limited return. I also want to support a comment made by a call-in speaker at the last board meeting in which he advocated for staying within our watershed. Others have also advocated for living within our means. Not only is this the highest quality water supply we have, but we're not at the mercy of other agencies when times get tough. I think we can assume that the next drought will make other agencies look at how much water they can safely export to Marin. If we're still using 60% of our potable water outdoors, we won't have a strong case for why Marin deserves more of a limited resource. And the increased focus on PFAS is another reason why we would want to stay within our own watershed. I'm looking forward to the upcoming May demand management presentation. Several of us have asked to see an alternative in which we reach staff's expected 4 million gallon daily savings by 2030 rather than by 2045. I'm interested in how much we'd have to spend on conservation to reach that goal, and I'm sure the board and others will be interested too. Also, at the last meeting, staff expressed interest in a slogan for our conservation efforts. I'd previously suggested Marin Water, it's too good to waste. Tonight, I'll add Marin Water, it's worth saving. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have one more speaker, Miss Marilyn Price. Go ahead, Miss Price.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I just want to wholeheartedly support Phil's comments. I remember in the last MMWD directors meeting, Director Smith mentioned speeding up the process for choosing new water supplies. I do believe that the way we currently use water is not sustainable in the future, and that decreasing demand by increasing conservation is a way to go in our future. To me, the choice of using conservation methods to increase our water supply should be given a priority now, and that both more time and funding can be put into studying the best and latest conservation methods that others are using to see how much this can bring down demand before other decisions are made to increase our supply. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay, then we'll move on to directors and general manager announcements, starting with directors. Monty, do you want to go first?
Nothing to add tonight.
Matt?
Yep, same, nothing out tonight.
Jed?
All good.
And Larry?
Okay, we had a doc meeting.
Sorry, Larry, I forgot to note that we'll do board committee reports in a separate agenda item.
Okay. Nothing that.
Okay, then I have just two quick items. Just to note that on April 3rd, Ben and I met with Professor David Sedlak at UC Berkeley. He's the chair of the Research Advisory Council of the National Alliance for Water Innovation. That's a large program that's funded by the US DOE in collaboration with our Department of Water Resources and State Water Resources Control Board that's headquartered at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab at UC Berkeley. And they focus on the development of technologies for recycling, reuse, desal, water treatment broadly. NAWI will be issuing RFPs for different types of collaboration, and there may be opportunities for us to engage with them further in the future. And in addition, on April 8th, I was able to join Alex and I and a team of our engineers to visit a recently completed East Bay mud installation of a technology that's been developed by a local company, InPipe Energy, to both reduce pressure in water distribution mains and produce hydroelectricity. Now, this technology speaks directly to one of our strategic objectives of exploring in conduit energy production. And I'm hoping that Alex and his team will report back on a feasibility analysis for either this system or other similar technologies at some point in the future. That's it for me then. So I'll move on to,
I actually do have one more thing.
yes.
On Sunday, I reported a leak to the water district, which was fixed today. So
Nice.
and there was a leak in Paradise Drive and it's taken care of. Thank you. Well done.
I'll add one, Ranjiv. I was able to attend the Marin Sonoma Water WAC meeting, which was attended by all of the leaders and the contractors from Santa Rosa, Petaluma, North Marin, and not a lot of excitement to report, except that they've gone through their own rate process. Their rates are going to be going up fairly significantly. I think they learned some from us, but they're also being, I think, super thoughtful. So it will have somewhat of an impact on our purchasing of water from Sonoma. And I think it'll help us, button up our own efforts to both conserve and be more thoughtful about our water efficiency efforts, because once we start needing to rely on that water coming from the north, it's more expensive for us down here. They also gave an update on the Eel River effort and the dynamics between being thoughtful and protective of the watershed and the fisheries, while also taking, supporting the PG&E in effort to take down the dam. That is progressing, and I think it was a very thoughtful, supportive meeting. Thanks.
I'd like to add something there. I thought that their cost comparison, they showed a graph showing they were the cheapest. However, the four other groups that they were talking about were all serving treated water. Contra Costa, Zone 7, San Francisco. So it really isn't equal. They showed they were cheapest by comparing, a Volkswagen to a Cadillac. So-
Larry, clarify that. I thought we were getting treated water from Sonoma.
No. We get drinking water, potable water, not treated. It's groundwater. It's pulled from under the river.
Right,
Not
but
from the river.
but they don't do any chlorination before they supply them.
Yeah, but that's
We do some second, I know we do some
$5 a-
additional treatment, right?
acre foot or $50 an acre foot for chlorination. It's an insignificant cost. The other guys are doing full blown treatment like we're doing, like 500, 600, 800 an acre foot. So, they didn't bother to mention that. And I was disappointed in that, very frankly, because I thought, it's apples and oranges at the best. And I didn't think they provided any information about justifying the change other than basically saying, well, we're the cheapest of these five. Okay.
Thanks, Larry, Jed. All right, Ben, general manager's announcements.
No comments tonight.
Okay, and so then we do, we've split out board committee reports to a separate agenda item. So Larry, I know you had the operations committee last Friday.
So in that meeting, there were two agenda items. The first one was the discussion of a contract being awarded to Stantec on general engineering consulting for the water district. It is the result of a E&O claim, errors and omission claim, and the settlement was that they would provide this service for free. So that was something we did with the previous board. And I felt that it was nice to see the fruits come home. Unfortunately, of course, they still had the error that was still an issue that had to be fixed. The second item was an update on water main breaks and leaks. I thought it was an excellent review of the process of fixing leaks and main breaks. And I will be talking more about this later, but I think it's an example of exactly why the current committee approach works the best, because all the board members were there and able to see this event. And I'll explain more about that later as to what the advantages of that over the changing it.
Thanks, Larry. Do we have any other committees that are due for report out? Nope. Okay. Then we can move directly to our consent calendar. And I just want to note there's 5 items essentially on the consent calendar. The approval of our minutes from our April 2nd meeting, general manager's report for March 2024, adoption of our essentially ongoing resolution for the emergency contracting for West Peak power pole removal, and then the award of 2 contracts to Maggiora and Galati Inc. One is contract number 2007 for the Granada Drive pipeline replacement project. This resolution includes a cooperative reimbursement agreement with the town of Corte Madera. And then the second contract is number 1996 for the 2024 Sir Francis Drake Boulevard pipeline replacement project. Last item on the consent calendar is execution of the professional services agreement with Stantec Consulting Services for engineering design. Any comments, including any public comments on the consent calendar?
There are no public comments on the consent calendar.
Okay, then if we do we have a motion to approve our consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote, please, Terry.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
Vice President Sampson.
Yes.
President Kush.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, on to our regular agenda then, starting with item 9A, which is our 2024 Watershed Recreation Management Planning Feasibility Study. Welcome, Sean Horn.
Good evening, Director Sean Horn, Director of Watershed Resources. I'm going to pull up a presentation for you this evening that we put together for staff's recommendation is requesting that the Board of Directors approve the Watershed Recreation Management Planning Feasibility Study that we're going to present tonight. So I'll just recall that the last 2 watershed committee meetings, we presented a similar presentation to what we're going to go over tonight. So we'll be kind of efficient in how we come through some of these, but we'll touch on all the pertinent topics. And how we've organized it is just a very high level overview of the planning process, a brief discussion of the planning document itself, and then a review of the strategic opportunities that have been developed through the collaborative process. And then the pilot program framework, just some initial thoughts on how that's going to be developed. So this is all happening under the Board Policy 7, which really guides our watershed management. It leans into the concept of adaptive management and how we can keep track of our natural resources and how people are using the watershed and make adjustments over time. With that lens, we developed the E-Bike Community Advisory Committee that we carried out for a number of months in 2019. Out of that discussion, we got recommendations to evaluate the watershed holistically in regards to how people are visiting the watershed and how we might be able to accommodate that visitation. From there, we developed the Watershed Recreation Management Planning Feasibility Study through 2 initial scoping meetings that we held with the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy. We then organized 6 public workshops. We had 2 watershed site visits that came along with that. And then we conducted a watershed visitor census survey update on the watershed. So we updated the 2012 survey and got results and had a kind of a touch point with daily users of the watershed. We then also kind of tried to leverage and use new technology to understand how people are using the watershed through installing eco counters, using Strava data and streetlight data. And then we presented updates throughout the process to the Watershed Committee. So I'll just The planning objective here was to evaluate current patterns of watershed visitation while collecting community input on current conditions and future desired conditions. We are considering opportunities for continuing to support safe, inclusive access with an emphasis on protecting the watershed's unique biodiversity, habitat, and water quality. And I will say there's a lot of good discussion that had happened through the workshops and the public engagement process. And I think this was a really healthy process for the district to be looking at how it manages the watershed into the future and thinking about the condition of it today. So the planning document itself was developed by having a number of inputs, that being our drinking water regulations and district policies, supported through literature review that was some of the district's own data that we've collected over the years from biological monitoring, also our collaboration with OneTAM, and then the community engagement. We organized the community engagement around how the document was going to be delivered and organized in terms of having areas of interest and desired conditions supported by our census survey, and then really diving into stewardship programs, visitor management, watershed facilities, and adaptive management. The document itself, the introduction starts with some of the planning process background, the goals, the environmental setting, reviews some of our biological monitoring data, but it's not meant to replace some of the other reports like the Peak Health report that the district is also collaborating with, but it did bring in some of that information. We also referenced the existing roads and trails data, the policies and regulations that we manage the watershed under, and then presented the visitor census survey findings. The public engagement process was then summarized, and then we presented the strategic opportunities that were informed through that engagement process. Those strategic opportunities, as I mentioned, are organized around stewardship, visitor outreach and services, watershed facilities, policies and plans, and adaptive management. With regard to the stewardship section, a lot of the focus was around how we could build capacity for trail volunteer opportunities, how we could have internal trainings to get staff prepared in our ranger trainee program, our watershed maintenance group, and our volunteer group to support some of the interests that the community has in volunteering to help steward our trails on Mount Tam. It was also looking at how we could build more connective tissue with other communities throughout Marin through our collaboration in OneTAM, looking at how we can tell the story of the watershed through wildlife docent programs, ambassador offerings, and then how we can really build the skills and capacity within our ranger department through interpretation training to kind of give them a new operational role on the watershed as well. And then through the stewardship, part of this process is going to be updating our priority list of non-system trails. Our current roads and trails management plan has a number of listed trails that we should be decommissioning. This was kind of built beyond the capacity of the district at the time, and we're thinking about updating that and combining it with visitor access improvements in a thoughtful way. The second part was kind of how we engage and tell the story of the watershed to our visitors. So looking at opportunities to update our watershed signage and continuing to improve our messaging and how we connect with visitors on the watershed. And then also developing some modern tools for them to actually access it. So geo-referenced visitor maps to help with navigation and hopefully reduce the number of lost hikers on the watershed. Also ways that we can tell them about some of the amenities and exciting offerings that we might have in terms of self-guided natural resource tours or natural resource and interpretive hikes that the district would be developing as we move this feasibility study into the implementation phase. With regard to facilities, policies, and plans, the district was looking at how we can improve access for low-income communities through the Parking Pass program, how we can think about expanding some of the slow zones where appropriate, how we could develop a pilot study and for multi-use and a pilot study for e-bike class 1. That was one of the elements that came out of the e-bike community advisory committee. And then beginning to update our roads and trails plan with a real focus on visitor experience and stewardship, which our last plan didn't encompass quite as much. Now, we recognize there's an opportunity as we look at how we manage the watershed to improve accessibility. We saw in our visitor survey that there's an aging community, and we want to think about how these trails are accessible. Also thinking about an opportunity to update our other power-driven mobility devices recommended in this document. And then an outdoor visitor amenity, it's improving some of the facilities that we have on the district's watershed. You can think we could celebrate the fact that we're a water district by providing good access to water fountains and areas that they can observe and experience the lakes and the resources that are provided to them through the district's operations. So kind of taking a deep look at that and coming up with a priority list of improvements that we could be making. As part of future projects that would happen under the Roads and Trails Plan update, we've developed a framework for a watershed project zoning approach. And this is really in alignment with how we moved forward with the Azalea Hill project, looking at resources first, thinking about access, and then looking at visitor patterns and ways that we can improve both, and considering the abiotic conditions as well. So this would be something we'd be looking at implementing as part of the projects that are recommended in an updated roads and trails plan. As part of our adaptive management, we'd be looking at updating the visitor census survey every 10 years. That was kind of in alignment with what we did this time, and it seemed like a good check-in. And then also, as we do improvements and think about trails and how people are using them, expanding our early detection rapid response, recognizing that that's one way we can protect the watershed from visitors' use. Now, with regard to the pilot programs, there's been a lot of interest in this. It was an interesting concept that came out of the discussions to think about how we could explore various ways of trail sharing. So one of the components of that would be to look at various opportunities for a bike access and single track experience through directional sharing, days of the week, strategic connections and loops. And we would be gathering information through this pilot study to inform an update to our roads and trails plan and a full CEQA analysis for that. So this would be in support of next steps. Similarly, we'd be recommending a pilot study for e-bike class 1 and gathering information to inform updates in the roads and trails plan. So to give some sense of how we're going to be looking at pilot programs as we develop opportunities and options to be explored further, we've developed a framework for screening the trails that we'd be considering. And we want to be really clear, we wouldn't be considering all trails. It'd be a subset in a targeted area. We'd run it through this screening framework, and we imagine that some wouldn't make the list for a pilot program. That screening framework would start first around biological resources, a review of our data around sensitive plants on the watershed, and then a survey of sensitive habitats and wildlife throughout that trail corridor that we want to be considering. A reference and review of kind of stewardship opportunities that could help allow for that pilot program to be successful while it ran. And then also looking at the current experience on the trail and the patterns of visitation, and thinking about the peak usage times to kind of drive our decisions around the various strategies we could explore through a pilot program of this type. Now, safety would be key to how we would run a pilot program of this type. We'd be looking at terrain difficulty and terrain conditions along that trail, thinking about accident history and enforcement history, trail hazards that may or may not be mitigatable, and then consider where slow zones should be established along these pilot programs. You can think trail intersections and the such. That infrastructure would be expanding as part of this process as well. We'd be then looking at the abiotic conditions to make sure that the trail tread could support that type of use, that there wouldn't be water quality impacts, and we'd be considering the geological setting of those trails that we're considering for the pilot program. There'd be a enforcement and compliance component, right? We'd have to improve our signage to notify folks of these changes on the trails. We'd be wanting to think about the regulations and how we communicate that out. Creating a regulatory framework to guide our rangers' kind of outreach around that trail and that pilot program. And then thinking about the resources and approach in terms of the locations of those sites and engaging stakeholders to ensure cooperation and ongoing discussions. So next steps as well through this, if this is approved this evening, we'd be moving forward with the next process in the roads and trails plan update. And we'd be really looking to integrate stewardship and visitor experience into that document, recognizing that it's an efficient approach to have it combined. It would provide us a compliance pathway for updating and taking on new projects that would support some of the concepts that we heard, and also help us better manage visitation on the watershed in different ways. We'd be reviewing our road and trail classification system to see if any updates should come out of that. We'd be considering the project restore list that we currently have and where it might be tweaked and tuned to support kind of in prioritizing areas of sensitivity as a kind of top priority for decommissioning of social trails. And then also trying to align those decommissioning opportunities with access improvements, recognizing that people are using those social trails because they're trying to navigate across the watershed. And so being thoughtful and strategic in how we manage both of those together. And then also thinking about a zoning framework, how we would roll that out for the above, for the project restore efforts, as well as the new trail classifications. And then thinking about incorporating modern trail management best practices. You can imagine this document hasn't been updated since 2005. So this would be a real opportunity for us to look at stewardship practices that could be built in, and then scope the program, which is really key to what we could achieve in 10 years and within the resources that we have for managing the watershed, or opportunities that we see for grants and supporting some of the projects we might be able to drive through this process. So with that, our intention is to have a discussion with you tonight, and staff is recommending again that that the board approve the final watershed recreation management planning feasibility study this evening. And then we'd be bringing back a pilot program framework to the watershed committee in June, as well as the schedule for the other activities that would be approved as part of this feasibility study for further discussion and prioritization. So with that, I'll take any questions that you might have, and thank you for the time.
Great. Thank you, Sean. Another really good overview of a long and I think a very thoughtful process. So thanks for that. I'd like to open it up for a director's discussion of the presentation. Matt, I'll start with you for any comments or thoughts, questions.
Sounds good. Thank you. And Sean, to you and your team as well. Again, thank you very much for not only the amount of effort you put into this, but the thought you put into us as well. These overviews are good, but there's so much more behind them, and we appreciate what you're doing. And also thank you for the updated photos to see some snow on the top of Mount Tam and the Tam band. That was a nice change for the slide deck. And I'm looking forward to supporting this plan tonight. But before I do, I like to challenge a narrative that I'm hearing from a lot of stakeholders out there, and not sides of an issue, but just everyone I'm talking to, that there's this winners and losers concept that's going on by moving this forward. And it's just something I don't see and I don't agree with. What I see is an evolution, a responsible evolution, so that we can better understand what the watershed can and cannot support via recreational activities. And I know we're focusing tonight on two issues. That's really the meat of this, these pilot programs surrounding e-bikes and single tracks, but this plan is so much more broader. And it provides us, the district, the framework to enhance all visitor experiences and take advantage of the many educational opportunities that we have here to share with everybody, so that that history, that knowledge, and all of that does not get lost in between generational gaps, which I think is just as critical as any component of this plan itself. We have a space that can be used to educate the next generation of conservationists and strengthen the number of advocates for the health of our watershed. The people that have taught me a lot, have been able to educate the public a lot, are the ones that spend a lot of time up there and are invested in that. And that's what I'd like to see continue through this plan. But we can't do that if we continue to exclude a growing number of people that live here in the county. And I'm not saying open up the doors for free reign, but we have to give them a seat at the table so they can come continue to contribute to our county and to the health of this area by fighting for the next round of any potential impacts. This plan responsibly looks at ways to incorporate additional users in a way that will study impacts while remaining adaptive and can change if negative impacts exist. And that's going to be the folks that choose not to follow the regulations, or people that choose not to understand that this next move, these pilot programs, are taken with responsibility as well. This is not an opportunity that we would like to see be pulled back because people choose not to follow the rules. But when we move forward with two pilot programs, I think it's important to look to see where we're at and what the actual impact is, because I'm hearing, and I do hear quite a few concerns, and I take and listen to every one of them and read all of the board comments that come in, because there's been a lot of time and money and energy invested into the preservation of this land that we now get to oversee. But right now we have an e-bike use all throughout the watershed. So with the pilot program, I do not see a big change. We are not fundamentally changing the way we're going to be using the watershed for recreation. And I think it's just the opposite. By moving forward with a pilot, we have the ability now to understand if this behavior is going to be detrimental to our area, and then we can use that information to make the next decision. And that is about as responsible, I think, as we can get, especially because the amount of energy and time and studying of the environment that goes in by you and your staff and our consultants is second to none in this area. So we have right now the ability, a foundation to build off of. And the same thing too for the single track piece. We're not looking to open up the entire mountain. That's not the intent. But it is the intent to be able to provide a little bit more access and then understand what that access is actually doing impactfully, so that, again, we can make another further discussion. So again, thank you very much. And I look forward to supporting the plan.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. Well said. Jed, I'll go to you next.
Yeah, I know this has been an extensive process, and thank you for including obviously the board, the public, and the staff and through all of this work. On the one hand, this is a major change and a shift, and on the other hand, it seems incremental to me. And emotions can get heightened. But I am focused on two, I think, very important things for us to consider with this next step and going forward. One is measurement of impact of these changes on the habitat and on the environment and on our species and the health of our water quality. And the second is enforcement. And so I'd like to just push a little bit on that and just get your thoughts on the research that we have on that. Quite specifically, when we do this next step with the pilots with trails and potentially additional use, what level of CEQA or other oversight do we need to have in order to make the changes that are being recommended?
So tonight we're talking about the feasibility study to move a pilot program forward. If we were to when we bring the pilot program to you for discussion and review, we'll review the CEQA approach that would be taken at that time. But the updates that would happen as far as permanent ones to roads and trails would happen through a full review of the roads and trails document and advancing that. So those are further down the line.
Great. So there's no necessary move yet until we make the recommended changes. All right. So that does seem to be something that's unclear in some of the public comments that I've received. And so I think that's important for us to follow through with as we go forward with changes. The second is on enforcement. It seems like on the one hand, yes, we have e-bikes on the watershed and therefore it could be said like, oh, that's okay, we should just do it. But enforcement's a real issue here, right? We are not able to enforce our own rules and regulations, and in some cases laws that does impact public safety. So how are we going to be much better at enforcement going forward, not just with these changes, but in general with how we manage this recreation plan?
So I think I would start by just thinking about your last experience on the watershed. And I think if you ask that question to most people, they had a really great day. And I went out today and I walked across the dam and I saw two bicyclists. I saw two guys sitting on a hill looking at birds. Pretty lovely time. And like enforcement today was looking good. We were, had lots of contractors out doing work. We had lots of people checking out what they were doing. And that's the daily experience. And of what we found in the visitor census survey was most people are having a really good experience on the watershed. There's always going to be a percentage of people that don't follow the regulations, right? We live in a world that feels like that. We have the resources to do enforcement for a pilot program and to monitor our watershed's activities. We're doing a really good job with a small team of rangers that are supported by natural resource staff, watershed maintenance staff, and we're doing a lot of work on the watershed to protect it and steward it and monitor the biological resources of it. I would say that enforcement will be key to how we look at our roads and trails plan update. And I think that's kind of the intent here, is to be forward thinking in how we observe and think about our management of the mountain. And I think it's just grounded in stewardship of continuing that discussion.
I think that makes sense to me. I think it's also clear that we have fewer rangers than we have had in the past, that there is a lot more that we could do. And I'd like to elevate that priority in our efforts on how we ensure that we are good stewards of the use of this land, and think about other ways that we could potentially make sure that one hiker or horseback rider doesn't get hurt when we could have been there. So I think the more we can elevate that as part of the next steps would be important. What are the current penalties for an e-biker on the watershed?
It has so it would be in line with our other power-driven mobility our motorized vehicle policy. I don't know the fee and the penalty offhand. We've done a presentation, I think, as part of the e-bike community advisory committee, and I think we brought it forward potentially as part of the watershed.
I think I would look at if this gets moved forward and then we end up implementing it in the next steps, is to looking at potentially significantly increasing the penalties for doing something wrong. So if we have, let's just say, a motorcycle that someone thinks is an e-bike, let's elevate the fine significantly And so that we have a clear deterrent for abusing this new policy that we have, so that it's not on us. Sorry, I have a couple more.
I do want to just respond to one piece though, because I think there is we've done a presentation at a previous watershed committee that people can look up around staffing on the watershed. And we actually have more staff than we've ever had on the watershed.
Yeah.
There was an intentional transition at a point in time when we needed to maintain the watershed more, that there was watershed maintenance department that developed that supported the rangers. And historically, the rangers were doing prescribed fire, visitor services, vegetation management, and road maintenance. They did all of it. And that was our staff.
Right.
Seeing the need for a more diverse workforce up there in terms of technical expertise is how the district kind of made a transition, bringing on biologists and ecologists to support the environmental compliance components of the work that had to happen, and kind of spreading that workload across a number of different departments. So I think that just gets lost a lot when we think about the
Great.
rangers.
And the more we can highlight that and expand that, the better, as far as I'm concerned. I really do appreciate the decommissioning of some trails and the importance of preservation of our critical habitat, and continuing to focus on both endangered species and local and native species, flora and fauna. I have seen a recent report that was interesting to me. It's actually not that recent, but it's a report over decades of land birds in the watershed. And it does have a lot of very interesting components about some that are gone, some that are decreasing, and some that are increasing. And, frankly, I don't know that we need more starlings in our watershed, but I would love to see a real detailed review of our birds on the watershed being leading indicators of the health of a habitat and global climate in general. And potentially, I know we've done a lot of work with Point Blue. I think they do outstanding work. The vast majority of the staff at Point Blue are scientists and researchers, and we've benefited from the work with Spotted Owl and other. I wouldn't mind having them further participate and partner with us on the impact of this plan if it goes forward, and understanding the impact of these trails and on land birds and other. And so that's a recommendation to consider. I think overall, like I said in the beginning, I don't see this as a massive apocalyptic change to a place that we all love and cherish. And we've proven ourselves over many decades to be tremendous stewards of this land and of the habitat and of the species that we share it with. And so I view this as a way to advance the recreation and the participation in our community, while hopefully significantly advancing the measurement and metrics and impact on the habitat and the enforcement of these changes, and hopefully we'll be better at caring and better stewards than we were before, even though while we're adding more access. So that's where I come out. Thank you.
Thank you, Jed. All good points. Appreciate it. Monty, your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. Some very good comments from Matt and Jed already on many topics. So I will say in general, I agree with the things that they've said. And Sean, I know that this, was a really big effort on your part and on the part of the staff, the consultant that we hired, to try to address something that has been lingering out there and there was a lot of high expectations for what would come from this. And what we do have has been a lot of really, I think, very meaningful engagement, a lot of input and feedback that is encapsulated in this feasibility study, a lot of valuable information that I think can really help guide us in the future. I think that, in terms of what this feasibility study has provided, has probably, I think for many has been a very mixed bag. We see that in the comments that we've received from the public. Director Sampson sort of spoke to the dichotomy of opinions that still sit out there. And I think that, to that end, a number of people, and I'll just say to myself, I had hoped and wanted for more out of this, as it started off as a recreation management plan and became a feasibility study. And I will be supporting the completion of the feasibility study tonight, because it's a really important step forward. I don't want to have my comments that I'm about to provide here be an undermining of the value that it provides. I think it's very foundationally very important information for us to do a number of things that I think we still need to do in the future to really address the need for recreation management, visitor management, protection of ensuring that our recreation and visitation is managed in a way that's protective of our watershed and, of course, our water supply. Probably the most notable thing that's being discussed again here tonight I would say, is the tail that wagged the dog, is the e-bike and bike access, which is a very important issue. I'm not saying that it's not, but I think, and I'm glad that we're taking the steps that we are to do a pilot program, to do it in a thoughtful way, to make sure that we are collecting data, that we are addressing enforcement issues and safety issues, and that we will learn from it, and it will help us to take subsequent steps in a thoughtful, well-informed, data-driven way. But what I would like to have also seen in a recreation management plan is something that I would have loved to have, and I hope for down the road, that we will create something where we get comments from a broad swath of our community excited about our vision. And I think therein, this feasibility study, because it became a feasibility study and not a plan, doesn't set forth a vision for how we want visitor experiences to occur on our watershed lands. I would like to have seen a plan that talks about our low-income community members and how to make the watershed more accessible for them, like a specific plans. I know we've identified opportunities, and I think that's great, but I would like to see opportunities turn into actual proposals, things that we are really considering doing, not just identifying. And we did a lot of very good identifying, but we want to, until things happen, they're good ideas that are not acted upon. Our low-income community members, who often don't live very close to our watershed, but they're part of our community. They support our customers that help fund these things. And so I think that's a really important issue. Opportunities to provide children access to the best classroom that is in the entire area, which is our Mount Tam watershed, and all the wildlife and habitat and streams that we've got on our lands. How to make sure that visitors with disabilities have a meaningful, valuable experience as everybody else. I know that we've talked about these things again, but I would like to actually see a vision where we actually really reach out to communities that can tell us what would make their experience on our watershed better. Identifying, exploring opportunities for visitors' facilities. What kind of facilities could we add that would increase benefits? And really, I think ultimately we need a vision that, and this is the big challenge, and this was the challenge that I mentioned with the consultant when we hired them, which is the big challenge of how to bring all these different user groups, bird watchers, hikers, cyclists, botanists, school groups, fishermen, you name it, who are all users of our watershed, how to bring them forward in a shared experience. If nobody gets to have their own individual singular experience, it's something we have to figure out how we can do together. And I think that we still have work to figure out how we paint that vision and how do we make it happen on the landscape. So I know that that is now going to be the subject of, and the focus of parts of our roads and trails work. I am really committed going forward to maintaining the momentum of what we have done, and to make sure that whether it's a visitor management plan or recreation management plan, whatever we call it, that we actually make it not just be driven by the bike access issues, but we really look at what this can be for many different user groups. So I'll stop there.
Very broad perspective, Monty. Thank you. Larry.
In the interest of time, I'm going to pass.
Yeah, I think it's hard to do better than what we've already heard. So I'm not going to try to either, but I just have one specific issue, which is coming back to what Jed spoke about regarding enforcement, Sean. I think so we've talked, Jed noted e-bikes, but we know that there's illegal trail riding, and part of this process we're hoping is going to incentive, by providing that legal access, we're incentivizing, less illegal activity. But at the same time, I think maintaining those disincentives for illegal activity is important. So I'd like to ask if we can come back to the current penalties for illegal riding on the watershed, and just determine if it would make sense to increase those penalties, to increase the disincentives that were that I think are a part of this the equation. So I think with that, we're ready to move to, unless there's anyone else, I think we're ready to move to public comments.
Yes, we have 7 so far. Miss Nona Dennis, Laura Cheriton, and Thomas Martell. Miss Dennis, please.
Thanks very much. Sorry, but breathing is my Achilles heel, if I can mix metaphors. You've said some very thoughtful things, and I'm not here tonight to ask you to vote no, vote yes. Everything you said is important to us, but I'm only going to focus on a couple of things, and that is next steps. And you've been talking about them. What are those next steps? And to do that, I went back to we already know the BIFIP has got to plug in here. But I went back to the Road and Trail Management Plan, which is 20 years old. I went back to the Program EIR, which is also 20 years old. And I said, what can we learn? We already know in very general terms what the plan doesn't have and what it does. It focuses exclusively, almost exclusively, on erosion and the causes of it. It also lacks agency. That is to say, there are no people in it. Things happen, but there are no people that cause them. So it also contains a huge amount of information that was assembled 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. And the question here is, we have never, if I have a complaint, it's been the failure to mention even one single example of a trail or a road, whether it is system or not system. Throughout this entire process, I have waited for one example and have never heard it. Now we're looking at criteria for how you might select pilot projects and so forth. And you've been told by others, what you need really is to go back to that plan and say, here, after 20 years of intensified use, we need a new inventory, because they're mentioned throughout that document. Cubic yards of soil displaced, linear feet that will be changed or modified in some way, trails that might be adopted or not adopted. So I'm not certain how you're going to deal with that, but a new inventory, which is current, is in our mind critical before you go forward. The second is the EIR itself. And there, I think you have raised that. There's a really gray area in our minds in between what can qualify as a, in quotes, exempt, or can it, a pilot project, and what cannot. The gray area is there are about 3 or 4 exemptions. You could go to categorical exemptions in which you could probably.
Thank you, Ms. Dennis. The 3 minutes are up. I have other speakers. After
Yes.
you. I'm sorry.
Pay attention to that EIR, because we will be paying attention and we'll be looking for the CEQA line when you adopt or think of proposals. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Dennis. Miss Laura Cheriton, then Thomas Martell.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity. I sent out two letters, and I just wanted to make sure that you've all seen them. One of my big questions is the Alta study doesn't seem to be represented, and I think it has a lot of really valuable information in it. So I've summarized it as I sent it out this morning. So I hope you'll take a look at it. It says it's a direct quote out of the study, key takeaways. And it talks about a comparison between 2012 and 2022 and the impacts and who's using. And it talks about the ages of people who have been using. And one of the things that I'd like to bring up is that we know that 44.4% of the users are senior hikers, and that is increasing. And that goes from ages 55 and up. That's not really addressed in this plan. In the feasibility study, it doesn't get mentioned. So I hope you'll take a look at that. The other one is 59% of the respondents didn't feel, or it says sense of safety among survey respondents increased from 59% in 2012 to 91% in 2022. And yet we've heard consistently that 1% of the people on the mountain feel unsafe. What this tells me is 9% of the people on the mountain feel unsafe, which is a big difference between 1 in 100 and 1 in possibly 10. And I know because I've run into people on the mountain who don't feel safe and they don't know where to go or how to report it. So I've often sent them to the watershed observation page, and I report regularly. In fact, night riders were coming down last week, and at the Throckmorton Ridge emergency exit, and I was coming from Point Reyes, and they almost hit me. They had incredibly bright lights. They blinded me as I was coming around the corner. So the night riding continues constantly. So I'm hoping that you'll take a look at some of these other issues that I brought up in a previous letter from yesterday. And another thing is that it seems like you want to increase the use. I keep hearing bring more people in, do more stewardship. Well, we have conduit communities that they're not represented. They don't even know that this is happening. Our community of Muir Woods Park takes the brunt of, and I've listed the places that people are going to, and they're coming up Panoramic Highway to get into the watershed. And we're not even aware of how much increase. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cheriton. Mr. Thomas Martell, then Linda Novi.
Hi, my name is Tom Martell. Thank you for having me here today. As a way of introduction, I am the former chair of Sierra Club Steering Committee and also a member of the Muir Woods Conservancy. I've been hiking on the mountain, I'd say for 40 years or so. And I'd just like to bring up a little something from Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, the play which I'm sure we're all familiar with. When Big Daddy asks Brick, "Why do you drink, Brick?" And Brick says, "It's mendacity that makes me drink, Big Daddy, mendacity." And that's what I'm seeing here tonight. As much as I love your representation of everything, you're a wonderful speaker. The Marin County Bicycle Coalition is a very highly funded group, and they have all the best players. They know how to work the internet. They know how to do things. Take what are you saying? All the graphics and data and everything else. And what I hear is this big thing about how they're going to do this, they're going to do that, they're going to do all this different stuff and monitor things, even though it's totally out of control now. I have never seen anyone riding on a bike in 40 years that's actually stopped to smell a flower or look at a deer or look at the water. It's an outdoor gymnasium for people who can afford a bike. And this is what we're getting. There's 37 different entrances to the water district. And there's no possible way insurance or LE enforcers are going to make sure that anyone is going to get a fine for anything. There's no license plates on these bicycles. There's no way of identifying them. So let me just for a quick thing of what might happen. If you're going to do all this stuff, you're going to need funding. And I don't know where that funding is going to come from. But I do know the funding for the Marin Bicycle Coalition comes from a lot of different groups, a lot of different law firms in San Francisco, and a group or a business called PON, P-O-N, which is a big conglomerate Dutch company which owns Mike's Bikes and most of the other bikes. And they have a real big interest in this because they are the #1 bike rental place. They're like the Gray Line to bicycle rentals. If you check this out, you'll see they rent bikes all over the world. Mount Tam is known as the birthplace of the mountain bike. My question is, if you open up the water district to bikes and you have the clear trails, they know what days they're on, how can you be sure it's only going to be local people who use it? How can we be sure that these companies can't come in and rent bikes and then people will take these same bikes, rent them in Mill Valley and drive them up the Panoramic Highway in front of all these other people's houses, causing huge traffic jams? People from all over the world who want to come up and do this, people who ride electric bikes, people who may be smokers, people who might not take as much care of the environment as we do. Is there a provision for this? Because once you monetize something, this is what happened. This is why we're on Ohlone land tonight, because they monetized the land. This is how the redwood trees got cut down because we monetized it. This is how the marijuana in Humboldt County went funny. We monetized it. And when you monetize the water district, what's going to happen is to support all these things,
Mr.
what, 2
Martel.
more seconds. What's going to happen is private money is going to come flooding into this, and your regular sources of investment from the county or from the public is going to go away.
Okay,
Then
thank
you're
you,
going to
Mr.
find
Martel.
yourself
We
in a
have other
position,
speakers,
okay,
so-
you're going to find yourself in a position where you're giving everything up to private industry and they're going to
Linda
demand
Novi.
things. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Linda Novi, and I'm here tonight as president of the Marin Horse Council. Marin Horse Council advocates for responsible recreation. That means compliance with all rules and regulations of the watershed and also adhering to the etiquette promoted by Slow and Say Hello. Horse riders care because we love the mountain. We want to protect its environmental assets, and we risk our lives, really, when we're out there on our horses and there are dogs off leash, there are speeding bikes, or there are bikes coming at us on a hiker and equestrian trail. So, as I said in my email from yesterday, only the most savvy ride on the trails anymore. And it's really become very reduced in numbers. Marin Horse Council supports the recommendations and concerns of Marin Conservation League and the California Native Plant Society. The board has said they want to see less illegal behavior, and thank you for saying that. We wanted to see a culture of compliance on the mountain. Significant and measurable improvement in compliance must be achieved, and not only on the pilot programs, but on the entire watershed. And I just want to make sure the board is clear on that. And I appreciate comments, especially Director Smith, your emphasis on making fines greater. I just heard from a Marin County Parks volunteer who's on the bike patrol saying he rides here at night. Why? It's safer. I won't run into horses. I got a ticket. It's pay to play. Bump that up. Pilot programs are assuming a high level of trust between all visitors. We need to see mountain bike organizations rise to the challenge. I have a question, a clarifying question. Are you going to consider e-bikes just on the pilot program areas, or are you allowing them on the entire watershed? And if not, and I'm seeing some response, then, a lot of work, a lot of outreach is going to have to go in on that. Marin Horse Council looks forward to helping restore equestrian and hiker trails, pulling broom as we are this Saturday at Marin Stables, and continuing equestrians' stellar role as stewards and our record of compliance with the rules and regulations of the watershed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Novi. Mr. Andrew Levine and then Jack, please.
Hello, I'm Andrew Levine. I just want to say I appreciate the opportunity to be part of the collaborative process that I really think Sean and his staff get a lot of credit for that, and the district for supporting it. It's been a long process and many decades, half a century, that cyclists haven't been involved, haven't been part of that collaboration. So I very much appreciate that you're giving us that opportunity to do that. And we're very happy, and all the folks I know in the bike community are happy to work with anyone else who wants to preserve this watershed, make it a good, pleasant place for everyone to visit and for the flora and fauna who live there, so that we make it not only as good as it is now or was in the past, but even better. And I think this plan is designed to do that. And I'm just happy that I have the opportunity to see that happen. So mostly just want to say thank you for that.
Thank you, sir. Jack, please. And then after Jack, we have Kathy Rizzo and Larry Menakis.
I just wanted to follow up on an important comment Ranjiv made about the possibility of increasing the fines for illegal cycling. And that's because I heard from a cyclist that there are multiple cycling groups who have organized gatherings where they go cycling on trails that are illegal. And when he commented to the group saying he did not approve of that and therefore didn't want to take part in the cycling gatherings that were done on illegal trails, he was immediately kicked out of the group. And the fact that illegal cycling is so organized and present, I think, is a clear indication that the fines are not sufficient. Yeah. For illegal cycling, I understand, of course, that cyclists want access to trails and everything. And I'm not arguing against that, just a point about for enforcement. And I think Ranjiv was on a good track there.
Thank you, Jack. Miss Kathy Rizzo, then Larry Menakis. Good, Kathy?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. And Sean, great presentation. I'm representing Marin Stables. And I have to say, I understand the enforcement that we're trying to lean to that, but it seems like a daunting task. I'm not quite sure how we're going to go about that. February 29th meeting where this pilot program was being suggested, I have seen a huge increase of bicycles on all trails. They are on Taylor Trail, they're on Hidden Meadow, they're on 6 Points. And when I ask them, what are you doing up here? They're like, oh, we have access to the trails now. So it is a free-for-all out there. They aren't following anything. And unfortunately, we've seen a huge increase of people coming off the hill, down the canyon, and through the stable. And that is like one of the most dangerous activities that you have for us. Our horses have no way to relax, to be just at peace with themselves in their own home. If we're riding in the arena, we have to worry about, is somebody going to fly around that corner and dump us? We've all been dumped off our horses due to users coming off that trail. So there is a huge disconnect, and the bikers don't seem to understand how to work with us and how to understand and how important it is not to put their needs ahead of others. And asset for the water district. When we ride up there, I can't tell you how many people, hikers, children, squeal and run up and ask us 1,000 questions. And we always engage. We know we're stewards of our sport, and we're also stewards of the water district. And we bring so much joy up there, but we're getting displaced and people are getting afraid to ride up there. There used to be, 100 users a month up there trailering, doing everything. When was the last time you saw a horse trailer come in? And when we ask our community about it, they say, well, we're afraid to ride up there because the bikes just do whatever they want. So please, when you're thinking about this, and I appreciate you, Monty, thinking about our safety, really take it not with a grain of salt, but what we're saying is we really are concerned for ourselves up there, and that's going to equate to our behavior. And we don't want to feel unsafe up there. Last night, I'm going on the canyon trail. I must have looked over my shoulder about 30 times because I didn't want an e-bike flying up on me and me getting dumped. So please, when you're looking at this stuff and you're thinking about it, please think about us and think about everybody's safety. That's it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Kathy. Next we have Larry Minikis and then 1402. Go ahead, Mr. Minikis.
Yes, good evening. And Matt, Jed, Monty, I appreciate your extended and very thoughtful comments. And Monty, I agree. I wish there was in this plan more along the lines of how we're going to address our underserved communities, bring them into the watershed. And I know this is a concern of all our directors. I've heard this from the directors, and it's a missing piece here. The education component. We've talked about this in the past too, and bringing education into this recreation plan would be very valuable. I think the concern is we're seeing more and more technology in terms of bikes that are beginning to look much more like dirt bikes, electric dirt bikes out there. And we are seeing electric dirt bikes as well. And the technology is just going to get to the point where these bikes, these motors are going to get more powerful. The batteries are going to get smaller. They're going to get out there. And it's going to be difficult, if not impossible, to enforce this because on bikes this fast, it's going to be very difficult to catch a rider if the rider does not want to stop. So in terms of enforcement, there's a real question as to how you go into this pilot project unless there's also a communication element to this, that somehow we're getting the word out that we're going to allow class 1 through the pilot, but somehow we've got to be able to address these very powerful, very fast, and what could potentially be very unsafe vehicles from entering the watershed willy-nilly. Thank you.
Thank you. This 1402 and then David Long and Barbara Salzman.
James Holmes, Larkspur. First, the plan's proposed e-bike pilot project seems singularly ill-timed. There's already an e-bike pilot project on the public streets, and it's not going so well, with the Central Marin Police, among others, warning of daredevil young riders on e-bikes that are actually motorcycles. If cops can't control e-bikes on the streets, how can the district control them on the trails? Second, you already have so much on your plates already that you should focus on your highest priorities. Show us that you can bring us more water before you bring us more bikers. Third, the e-bike project seems contradictory to what the general manager told me at the Corte Madera rate increase workshop last year when I asked how the district could justify the cost of expanding regulation when it was proposing huge increases for basic maintenance and more water. The manager replied that the plan's purpose wasn't to expand recreation, but to manage it better. This is expansion. Further, I've heard no projections about the cost of this expansion. If it's monitored adequately, costs will increase considerably. If there's no cost increases, then there won't be adequate monitoring. Cost-wise, this is a lose-lose proposition. The district doesn't know how many more people will crowd onto the trails if e-bikes are allowed. Lots, according to e-bike advocates who claim big demand. The truth is, the district doesn't really know the impact or the cost. You will open up a can of worms unnecessarily and not be able to put the worms back if the experiment doesn't pan out. Please don't be stampeded by a small, self-interested group, including non-residents, who are minuscule compared to the mass of overburdened ratepayers. Remember, your primary constituency is ratepayers, not recreators. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. David Long, please. And then after Mr. Long is Ms. Salzman. Go ahead, Mr. Long.
Thank you. My name is David Long. I'm the co-president of the Marin chapter of the California Native Plant Society, CNPS. We've long been involved in protecting native plant biodiversity on the Mount Tam watershed. And I think the first and most important point in thinking about this is the best evidence of environmental impact of authorizing additional recreational activities on the watershed is the environmental impact of those activities in the past. The past being, 5 minutes ago and in the past. And I want to say that again because it's really important. The best evidence of environmental impact of authorizing additional recreational activities is those impacts in the past. And The question is, do we know the environmental impact of visitor activities on the watershed? The answer is clearly no. The last baseline inventory, as has already been discussed, was the 2005 RTMP. It was not a recreation plan. It didn't analyze visitor activities or trace them to specific environmental impacts. Yet we know the watershed has been impacted by recreation for over 100 years. In all that time, has there been a comprehensive analysis of environmental impact of visitor activities? Never, never. We find it difficult to comprehend that pilot projects to authorize additional recreational activities would be set up without a better understanding of the environmental impacts of existing recreational activities, not just where the pilot projects are going to take place, but on the watershed as a whole. And we concur with the sense of urgency that is expressed at the recent Watershed Committee meeting, that any pilot project must measure its impact on illegal trail use, on night riding, and illegal trail building. That requires an understanding and an inventory of the impact of recreational use system-wide, not just on the trails that are part of the pilot project. That's what does not exist. The 20-year-old RTMP data are also incomplete because they didn't look at how those problems got created. And we know that non-system trails have proliferated ever since the report has been done. But yet a new inventory is the foundation of any meaningful analysis of pilot project impacts. And under the feasibility study, that would come after the pilot projects. The pilot projects contain everything, the feasibility study contains everything that's needed, it's just in the wrong order. I just want to highlight a policy recommendation of the feasibility study, which is nowhere discussed, which is that 2/3 of survey respondents opposed unrestricted e-bike access to the watershed. And so.
Thank you, Mr. Long.
I'll stop there. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Miss Barbara Salzman, then after Miss Salzman is Lisa. Go ahead, Miss Salzman.
Hi, I'm representing the Marin Audubon Society, and I think that it's my placement in line here is very fortuitous because the previous two speakers raised very good questions and issues about what you're planning to do. I would like to add some additional needs. One is that if and when you do, I guess you're going to do it tonight, decide to proceed with a pilot program, you need to make sure that it's accompanied by a carefully designed study informed by the 84 papers in the recreation ecology literature that document the impacts of recreational uses. Now, those impacts are the same ones that have been brought up many times with you and that are not really adequately addressed or even enumerated in the feasibility study. All of the Point Blue survey points in their land bird surveys that have been going on for quite a long time, it's great information. But there has been no analysis of the impacts and the reasons locally for those declining species. Half of the species, native land bird species nesting in the watershed, are in a state of decline. 31% are in the significant state of decline, and that's pretty outrageous, and that's not really called out in a way that you would recognize it in the feasibility study. So one of the things that you need to do is make sure that the surveys are redesigned so that the connection between recreation uses and the declining species is brought to your attention and everyone's attention. That's at least what we should expect from our water district. The surveys are not designed to make any connections. The reasons they give in the feasibility study are general. You could apply them with climate change to anything, but there are very likely to be recreational impacts. All of these, their survey points are located adjacent to trails. And so it should be easy to address. Finally, I'd like to urge that in addition to monitoring and surveys, they tell you current data. They don't make any connections. They don't tell you what the problems are or how you can correct them. So you need to make sure that step is in any study that comes that you require of the of the district. Finally, the enforcement of the was discussed in terms of the pilot program area, but not the remaining trails. So I'm not sure if they're going to be neglected in terms of enforcement, or if the enforcement just going to be
Ms. Salzman,
on pilot program trails. Thanks.
Oh, good. Thank you. Next we have Lisa. After Lisa is Bill Keene and Karen Hanna. Go ahead, Lisa.
Hi, my name's Lisa. I'm a biologist. I've been hiking the trails on Mount Tam for about 25 years. I am very concerned about this. Last week I had called and spoke with the ranger to report bicycle damage off a trail around the Arturo Trail. So I guess the bicyclists don't like having steps to go up and down. So anytime there are steps on the trail, they make trails going around them. When I spoke with the ranger, he said that there was also, he would put it on the list because there's already extensive damage on the Ben Steen Trail, and they have limited resources to do this work to repair those trails. I have photographs of bicyclists on single track trails, clearly marked no bicycles. He told me, oh my God, don't ever photograph bicyclists on trails because there have been numerous reports of altercations between bicyclists and hikers reported. So this is telling me that we already have a safety issue and that it's being reported repeatedly. There's already ecological, environmental damages being done. But my questions are to you, with the increased safety risk to hikers from bicyclists and horse riders, how will you provide extra resources to protect hikers from these altercations? If there is an altercation and someone gets injured, who is the responsible party? Would that be the water district who permitted this study to allow more bicyclists on the trails, even with prior knowledge of these altercations? If the responsibility falls on the bicyclist, how would an injured party be able to identify their assailant? Would you consider registering the bicyclists so they can not only be identified, but also show proof of safety training prior to going out on the trail? Should the bicyclist need to show proof of liability insurance? Bicyclists so far have shown little restraint at breaking the rules of the trails and protecting this precious mountain. I strongly urge you not to reward this behavior, and please stop the feasibility study until further planning is put into place. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Lisa. Mr. Bill Keene, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good evening, board. I just want to start by saying thank you for moving this pilot study along. I think it's a long time coming. And listening tonight, you would think the sky is falling, but I think that bikes are already on the watershed the last time I checked. And all we're really talking about is doing some pilot trails to study how those would be affected. I'm going to suggest that you use existing single track trails for pilots. Don't build anything new. They're already there. Where you can, make connections between fire roads. Find a way for bikes to get from the top of the mountain down to the lakes, or at least to as close as you can to the lakes on single track. I think it would be an awesome experience. I'm going to suggest something that may be a little controversial, but I think it's important to see if we can't find out some good information on how trails function in serpentine areas. I think about a pilot trail within the serpentine area to see what the real impact is. I've heard that the serpentine area needs some disturbance. Well, let's find out. Is having a bike on a trail, is it a positive thing? Is it a negative thing? Or is there no impact? I think having at least one trail open to bikes that's in a serpentine area would really help inform your RTMP. Now, I definitely would not suggest building new trails within the serpentine area if you can avoid it. I think I would agree with everybody who's said avoiding that. I'm on the board of Access for Bikes, and I am representing them tonight. And I want to tell you that Access for Bikes as an organization is committed to stewardship and helping you in your stewardship of these trails. And we want to be part of your solution. We also really want to help out on education. I've heard a lot tonight of how are you going to get the word out? Well, we've got over 3,000 people on our email list. We have a huge emphasis at the Tamarancho where people go. We're going to get the word out. Trust me on that. And then the last one, and I've said this at previous meetings, the real environmental impact that the board needs to consider, maybe it's at the RTMP stage, is you really need to close off off-trail hiking. I mean, to me, that is one of the biggest environmental impacts to habitat fragmentation. Board member Smith talked about birds. I think about the off-trail hiking. I think about the trails I've seen down in the Swede George watershed area. Let's just get rid of that practice. It's antiquated. Let's have everybody share the trails. Let's have them stay on trails. It's going to be good for people, good for users, and it's really going to help the environment if we eliminate that practice. Thank you. And again, we really appreciate this pilot.
Thank you. After Mr. Keene is Karen Hanna and then Theodore Gilliland. Go ahead, Karen. Go ahead, Karen. Okay, I'll come back to her. Mr. Thomas Gilliland, please.
Yeah, hey there. It's Theodore Gilliland, or Wynn. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the board for being so inclusive with considering this pilot. Really, really appreciate it. I think it's going to be fantastic for the community. And I just wanted to encourage the board to really think about the youth and the kids out there that don't have access to automobiles when they're putting this pilot together, and think about routes and trails that will allow the youth community that obviously loves mountain biking in the watershed to get more access without having to drive anywhere. That's all I had. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Miss Karen left, so I have now Kathy Rizzo. Go ahead, Kathy Rizzo.
I'm actually, Karen's here with me.
Oh, okay.
I hand her over my laptop so she can talk. She lost connectivity.
All right, thank you.
Hello there. Sorry about that. I just wanted the board to, when they're considering all these pilot programs, to really be aware about the old historic trails that were built over 50 years ago that never were built to handle any big additional usage. They were built way before bike usage was up there. Some of those trails are only 12 to 18 inches wide in areas. And just to be thoughtful and what trails that you're going to allow bikes and e-bikes on. And also just with about the enforcement of the rules that the board brought up, that in about 15 years ago, there were at least 30 rangers around, and I wanted to know how many rangers are currently on the mountain at this time, to make sure that there are enough rangers out there that have the ability to do enforcement and give out tickets and the fines that you're talking about increasing. And that's it.
Thank you. Lastly, we have Marilyn Price. Go ahead, Ms. Price.
Oh, okay. Let me see. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, and I'm approaching it from a different angle, although I have been a mountain biker all my life. But in reference to your thoughts about the people who cannot normally get to the mountain, either they're, underserved population, I founded our Trips for Kids organization, which was founded to take inner city kids on mountain bike rides. And I ran that for 28 years, and we always took kids on Mount Tam. And I worked with a lot of the inner city programs throughout the county and the San Francisco Bay Area, just numerous ones. And I would just say, you know, to put your words into action, to definitely reach out to these groups. Why I decided to concentrate on the agencies was because they cannot take the kids without some help. And that's what our Trips for Kids did. So you all working with our, you know, certainly our Marin groups that are serving that population and finding out ways to serve them is how you can definitely put your words into action. And if there's any way I can help with that, I'm around.
Thank you, Ms. Price. There are no further speakers.
You know, we clearly don't agree on every point. There will be a lot of discussions going forward as the plans come together. But I really think that having the level of engagement on these topics that we have from all of you, from all of our community, ultimately will put us in a much better place. So I think, speaking for all of the board, we appreciate the community and your inputs and your engagement, your interest in this process. And with that, I'll ask if we have a motion to approve the Marin Water 2024 Watershed Recreation Management Planning Feasibility Study.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Then Terry, could we have a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Schmidt,
Aye.
Director Smith,
Aye.
Vice President Sampson.
Yes.
President Kush.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. We'll move on then to item 9B, which is our grant program update. And JP, I guess that's you. Okay, got it.
Good evening, directors. I'm Sean Horn, Watershed Resources Director. I'm joined with
Hi, everybody. Nice to see you. JP Haler, Grant Program Coordinator.
Thank you all for coming.
All right, so this evening we've got an update on our grant program. We're going to take a couple minutes to walk you through the program as a whole, and specifically give you an update on the current grants that we're managing under the program and some of the outstanding applications we currently have being reviewed by the agencies, and then discuss some funding opportunities that are on the horizon that are organized kind of by department or bucket, if you will, and then think through some of our federal funding opportunities that we're exploring and advancing currently, and also think about where we can expand the grant program going forward as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it to JP for the first few slides, and then we'll go from there.
So really the work of the grant program looks like continuing to track grant opportunities across our funding agencies, which we'll get into a little bit more who those funding agencies are. Ongoing relationship building with their staff, the agencies and their staff, tracking funding opportunities and priorities at the state and federal levels, collaborating interdepartmentally here at the district to match our projects to funding opportunities we're seeing. Also administering the grant agreements, quarterly and final report documentation and financial administration is kind of the other side of that grant work. In terms of engagement, so one of the ways that we are engaging outside of specific grant funding opportunities and writing proposals and that kind of thing is engaging with different associations, committees, and federal and state legislative offices. We also, as many of you know, have a consultant that is supporting us on federal funding opportunities like the WRDA, Water Resources Development Act. So this shows a grant funding summary for the last 14 years. And you can kind of see here that it was a little flat for those 9 years. And through 2020 to 2022, we started growing the grant program. And in 2023, we more than doubled the funds that we were raising from outside funding agencies. And in Q1 of this year, we are close to our total grant funding from last year. This is just a simple representation of those numbers and what that trend looks like since 2010. And this is where we get into who is funding us. So this number you see up here, the 6.79 million, those are agencies or private sources. Also, there's a member request there under 1 million or under. So we kind of wrap them up into one section there. And the rest of these show the support we're getting from the Department of Water Resources, Wildlife Conservation Board, CDFW, and also CAL FIRE. And we're looking at, $37+ million that we're managing in grants. And this is represents the applications, awards, and then grants that we are currently managing. So when I say awards, some of them we don't actually have the funding yet, and we're not necessarily managing them yet, but we are waiting to find out. You can sort of quickly review what that breaks down to. I think it's 16. We have 16 grants here represented. Some of them still pending, and we're managing about 22. I think there's I just wanted to point out some of the larger grants we're waiting on. Okay, I'll pass it on.
So I'll just note that with the spread of grants that we are managing, that we've got a nice kind of spread across departments, right? We've got water resource represented. We've got lots of watershed opportunities that we've been funded for. And also looking at water conservation initiatives. San Geronimo Generator got funded, and then we have a large grant with FEMA that's being reviewed. And all the grants that we're currently managing, we're also putting in the GM report on a monthly basis, so you can kind of see how those things progress. In the GM monthly, you'll see applications submitted, and then we take them off if we don't get funding, right? And we don't keep tracking them. So what we want to do next is just kind of give you an outlook of some of the departments and we tried to organize all these grants, based on their kind of priorities for the district and how they would align with work that's ongoing. The grant game is deep. There's tremendous, you could sit all day on the federal database looking for grants, but the ones that align with the district's current projects, programs, and priorities, that's where we start to kind of hone them down. So you'll see a little bit of overlap with what we're looking at for the coming year or so and what we've gotten funded for. One that we have not in the past secured funding for is this Governor's Office of Planning and Research, the Regional Resiliency Planning and Implementation Grant, ICARP. A really interesting opportunity, does require kind of a collaborative approach, so multi-agency, multi-jurisdictional, regional, but there's a real opportunity there for the district in the future. U.S. Bureau of Reclamation's the Water Smart Planning Grant is one that we're putting an application together to support some of our water resource planning. Really good opportunity for us as we move that forward in parallel. We'd be wanting to look at developing a feasibility study to support the next USBR grant, which is the Water Small Storage Program. The requirement there is that you have a feasibility study that's approved by USBR. So there's kind of a timing thing that we start to play with these grants and trying to, tee projects up for the next step and next stage. But those are two really promising opportunities for water resource related projects.
What is the purpose of that one?
Which one?
That one you just talked about, small water.
The small storage?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
what does that mean? Improving
storage by 200 acre feet to 30,000 acre feet.
More than 30,000. I got that.
Yeah. So, if you're doing a reservoir, if you're doing groundwater storage, any way that you're improving your system's supply in that threshold.
But not a tank.
Good question. You could do a tank. Yeah. And some of these we might not have all the answers to tonight, but, happy to look into them deeper if we don't know exactly the right response today. Department of Water Resources has been a good funder of the district in the past through IRWIMP. We are evaluating a funding opportunity through the existing grant we have with them. That was a result of one project dropping out of the IRWIMP. We don't know what the next round of IRWIMP funding will really look like. And similarly, the Urban Multi-Benefit Drought Relief Program, the district was funded at $2 million coming out of the drought in 2021. That program, we didn't get we weren't funded in the second round of funding, and we do not see any additional funding coming out of that program right now. FEMA hazard mitigation program and the BRIC program are really promising in terms of our water supply infrastructure. We do have an application in with BRIC right now, but there could be an opportunity for future applications as well. And then the Regional Water Quality Control Board has a variety of loans and grants, and so we're keeping an eye on that, but we don't have one identified currently. Water efficiency related grants, these come through some of our regional collaborations as well as some of these programs. So Water Smart is a big one that we've been funded through. We're looking at that one for future applications. And then also Department of Water Resources, IRWIMP has been a past funder. And we've also gotten funded through some of our collaboratives with kind of these regional networks through other efforts. Now, watershed related grants, Department of Parks, RTP program. We currently have the grant with them for Azalea Hill. That's actually federal funding that comes to the state of California, and then they put out grants. We'll be looking at that for future recreation related opportunities. Cal Fire Forest Health, we did get notified that we recently got awarded one as part of our one TAM proposal, which is huge, and we're waiting to find out the kind of exact amount depending on kind of how the state allocates all the funded projects. We've just been notified though. And then the State Coastal Conservancy, we're in the process of putting an application together also with the One TAM Collaborative. That'll be supporting some state parks work in Tomales Bay, and then also a compliance related position within the district to support our BIFIP is kind of how we're packaging that one up. Hopeful, next few months it goes to their board for review. Wildlife Conservation Board, we recently got a one TAM grant with them, but this program actually has a lot of opportunities, broad, beyond just wildfire related issues, fisheries, forest restoration, other activities that we could potentially put in applications for. And so we are looking at that one, and that's a kind of continuous program on a rolling basis. Now, fisheries, the list gets long. There's a lot of opportunities for fisheries for protecting endangered species. CDFW's FRGP, Fisheries Restoration Grant Program, is one that we've been funded by for planning. We'll be looking at that for implementation of the second phase of Lagunitas Creek in the future. Similarly, the Watershed Restoration Program and Nature-Based Solutions, also good opportunities for our Lagunitas Creek work. Department of Water Resources Riverine Stewardship Program. This is what's funding our gravel augmentation work in Lagunitas Creek, and also something that would be really relevant for phase 2 of Lagunitas Creek. One that I'm super excited about is NOAA Transformational Habitat Restoration and Coastal Resiliency. Through our work with our consultant, we understand that this program is going to receive a significant amount of funding in the future and really has a lot of opportunities for, broader than just Lagunitas Creek, but maybe collaborative work through the One TAM effort where we might be able to package a number of restoration projects that relate to salmonids. And Wildlife Conservation Board, again, they have a fisheries program. We'll be continuing to look at that. We did have initial discussions with them about 1.5 years ago, and they were really excited about funding Lagunitas Creek. We were just successful in lining up other funding first, and so we'll be going back to continue that discussion in the future. State Coastal Conservancy as well, Regional Water Quality Control Board, and U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, all programs that we'll continue to track and look at for our fisheries programs specifically. Now, when we start to look forward, we wanted to kind of stretch with our grant program and think about where else has the district been focused and where else can we maybe start to look and kind of hunt for grants. So PG&E has some rebates for EV infrastructure. That's something that the district's looking at in regards to our fleet. There's also some direct payment options that come from other programs around incentives for clean energy, and also the California Clean Energy Commission and Air Resource Board has incentives for charging stations. So a lot of opportunities in regards to fleet electrification that we'll be exploring in the future. There's also energy efficiency and alternative energy grants. The Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant is probably something that could be really interesting for the district down the line. Local Government Building Decarbonation Challenge. As the district looks at facilities, that might be something that we fit into. EPA has a climate pollution reduction program in 2025, and then MCE, Commercial Energy Efficiency Program as well. We've seen opportunities for micro turbines that we'll be exploring, and climate adaptation is kind of a new area of focus that we see at the state and federal level. And I think with the district's operations and watershed lands, there's a lot of opportunity in that space for us to start exploring, and specifically with some of our regional collaborations, whether it be the Golden Gate Biosphere Network, One TAM, or some of our working groups around water conservation and water resources. Now, at the federal level, you have all heard about the Water Resource Development Act multiple times around getting written into the bill in 2022, and we've been continuing to do our work to connect with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to advocate for the projects here in Marin. We did a site visit to Nicosia with the Army Corps in March and with Congressman Huffman's office. We've been continuing outreach to the division. So that was kind of with the regional office. We've been continuing outreach with the division office and the headquarters office, and we'll continue that. Well, I think we're about 30 days away from when their work plan should be finalized. So we'll be tracking that as well and continuing to try to get updates as it progresses. We're hopeful that there will be a authorization or appropriation, for the funding in 2022, but we don't quite know. And then we're kind of right at this opportunity where there's direct spending requests through congressional requests, and we're moving those forward in the next month or so.
So in summary, we are continuing to secure funding and continuing to prioritize water infrastructure, the Lagunitas Creek restoration, recreation, wildfire, and forest restoration projects. We're also continuing to track district priorities and projects to identify new grant programs like we just talked about, and doing our best to build and maintain collaborative relationships for joint funding opportunities through One TAM and others, and continuing to track key legislation and funding opportunities with our consultant and through engaging with committees and others.
So this item was just an update, and so we'll take any questions you might have and just recognize there's a lot of current management we're doing around grants and a lot of opportunities in front of us.
Thanks, Sean. JP. Nice to have a really encouraging update following that last discussion. Particularly the One TAM, the latest One TAM funding. I mean, I was seeing in the report, you noted that about $2 million may go into the BIFIP implementation from that. So that's really exciting. We hear a lot about sometimes, potentially not doing enough with respect to wildfire mitigation based on things like ranger numbers. Sometimes I think the full picture of what we're doing up there is not getting across, but we'll open it up to directors' discussion. Monty, you want to start?
I'll just simply say that graph that you showed early on, the incredible trend, keep it up. That the amount of funds that we're bringing in, how much it differs from what we were doing before. I don't know what it led to us to be able to do that. Maybe it is more grant programs, or we're just being more active, but it's fantastic. I mean, that's really a significant accomplishment. So kudos to all the work that goes into making that happen, because it's a lot of work to submit grants and to pursue them and to develop the relationships and support. So thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think we should all be saying thank you on this one, because this is a lot of work, not only just to submit the grants, but once you get awarded, then the fun really starts on that end too. So thank you very much for that. And also it's a good reminder, excuse me, a good reminder, especially when we talk about, the funding questions, when we just came off the recreation piece about how we're trying to keep our lands healthier. And I think this speaks volumes to the efforts that are doing that. And so I'm glad we're able to highlight and bring it forward. One question just for thought. We talk about a lot of partnerships with One TAM Collaborative, the Golden Gate Biosphere Network, potential other landowning agencies in the county. Any thought about collaboration with the other water agencies in the region for those types of projects?
Yeah, great question. We actually gave a tour to North Marin Water District today around some of the veg work that was going on, and they're looking at developing their own veg program for some of the lands they manage. And that's a natural kind of collaborative space, as well as any water supply planning in the future. So definitely like those ICARP grants that are like regional, there's a lot of work that could be done to kind of build a coalition around those opportunities.
Great, thank you.
Great, Jed?
I just wanted to speak to that.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. We also do have, through the water conservation grants, there is collaboration from the Irwin funding through East Bay Mud, Sonoma Water. Everybody's involved in one funding effort to fund the various water conservation programs. So it is happening a little bit now too.
Cool. Yeah, I was able to connect with Grant up at Sonoma Water, and they're more than happy to partner with us on that. So good point. Thanks, Matt. One other concept or organization that you may want to think about reaching out to is the California Strategic Growth Council, which does leverage cap and trade funds from some of the biggest polluters in the state that gears that money towards sustainable climate efforts, most specifically towards lower income communities like we have in our area. EV vehicles and other transportation for our employees might be something that could be considered for grants there. And I frankly think that the North Coast of California could benefit from that organization's great work more than we currently do. You know, we're obviously in a federal election year, so the more we get that Army Corps of Engineers effort in full throttle gear, the better. So all out to do what we can to get that going would be great. And the only thing that I didn't see in here, which I think is going to be increasingly important, is our, you know, major focus on water supply, storage, and conveyance, and helping secure our customers and our county for the future. And given the price tags that we're starting to see on some of these efforts, it's starting to look like some of the major ones, there's no chance that we're going to do on our own. So I think it's time to start looking for the $100 million grants, the $200 million grants, because we're not going to be able to do it on our own. Where can we get the real significant support that a place like us frankly deserves, given the crisis that we have been in, having a very limited water supply? We can do everything we can with water efficiency and conservation, and I hope that we put more effort there. But if we're going to engage in any of those efforts, I think this is going to be one of the most important parts of your role. And if those kinds of significant funds are not going to be available to us, whether it's for recycling or desal or increasing our storage, et cetera, then the earlier we know, the better, so that we can maybe gear our energy in a different direction.
Thanks, Chad. Larry?
I'm curious about how you prioritize. I mean, it seems to me that the monies, the earmarked monies, are the largest amount in single chunk. And we should be pushing hard on those. I mean, it's fine to shotgun as things become available, but to really focus, I think, is critical here. And I'm just curious, how do you decide on the prioritization?
And are you thinking prioritization with all of it, or are you specifically?
I'm just asking a question.
Yeah, the WRDA is one that we're pushing really hard on because it is the biggest amount, but it's the one that we don't have the door open to yet, right? And so that's the key, is getting that first funding, and then we can continue to advance the projects and make that request to get that funding. But it's always going to be dependent on the federal budget and that process. So that's always kind of a complicated piece too. The prioritization, you know, I would say that where the district has programs and projects that reach a threshold that make them more competitive for the grant programs is really where we're most successful with our grant applications, and to some extent begins to drive the prioritization. Grant programs typically, like big ideas without a lot of, you know, buy-in by the organization, they see that pretty easily. And I think that's part of how we kind of prioritize, is really thinking where we're going to be successful, competitive, and what's matching up with the priorities of those organizations.
Yeah, and Jared Huffman was explaining that he doesn't even know, as a congressman, you know, they don't know until the budget actually comes out which of the earmarks are going to be accepted, and there's apparently no rationale to them.
Yeah,
you know, there's no plan. I suppose that numbers like that, when you're thinking about things like the Pentagon, are kind of trivial in the big budget picture.
Yeah, we're learning a lot about the process and learning that there's not a clean direct line, and that it's just ongoing engagement is really critical.
Yeah, even from his level.
Yeah.
You know, he doesn't really have much buttons he can push. He can ask, but he can't really push.
I will say when we advocated at the federal level, it was really well received and acknowledged that there was a lot of support for this and a need for it. So I think that demonstrates a lot of commitment just for the process and that funding.
Yeah, you've got to be careful about those glad handers, though. I mean, that's true all over Washington. You always get well received. The problem is what happens next.
Great. Yeah, just, I was thinking about Matt's comment on how much work it is to manage these grants once they come in. And I'm sure given how the increase in numbers, it's becoming quite a lot. Is there any concern about getting stretched too thin that potentially reduces our ability to go focus on maybe the levels of funding that Jed just noted for infrastructure development?
I'll start the answer and then JP can chime in. I will say the one area that we get a lot of lift from and benefit is our collaboration with OneTAM and some of these other collaboratives, because often the grant administration is taken on by those groups. So OneTAM is holding the CAL FIRE grant for us. They're holding a Coastal Conservancy grant in the past, another CAL FIRE, and that is a huge benefit to the district. So that's a lot of support that comes from those collaborative efforts. That's been true for IRWIMP as well, as we're recognizing the water conservation grant that we've gotten in the past and how that was administered was supportive. It is a lot of work. We do get a lot of lift from kind of interdepartmental collaboration, and I don't think we can say enough about that. Just all the various groups that are benefiting from the funds for the projects are supporting the grant administration as well. But yeah, I think that there's large organizations that have a lot of resources at this for reasons that you can bring in a lot of support for projects, but it does take a lot of work, and not all of it is successful work, right? Or it's kind of invisible work, right? It spends a lot of time making those connections with agencies, developing your projects around their priorities and aligning things in that way. And that takes a lot of background work.
Sales is always hard.
Well, great. Thanks a lot, Sean, JP, for the update. Appreciate it.
We have one public comment.
Oh, public comments, of course.
Yes, Mr. Larry Minikis, please.
Yes, good evening again. I just thought as a member of the public, I'd like to acknowledge this work, because often this kind of work doesn't go past this room, and the public doesn't learn of what's going on out there. I'm really getting a lot of grants, which is great. And to Jed's comment about reaching for some of these very large infrastructure grants, I have no idea how realistic that is, but certainly it is worth a try, because we're going to need some help there, as Jed was saying, with getting these infrastructure projects completed. Thank you, and good evening again.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay, then with that, we'll wrap up and move. Thanks again, JP, Sean, and we'll move to the last item on our regular agenda, which is 9C, dual noticing of committee meetings.
Good evening, President Kush and directors. I'm Molly McLean, General Counsel, and I have a proposal for consideration for the board tonight, and that is to shift direction on the dual noticing of our committee meetings as special board meetings. So outlined in the staff report for you tonight is the proposal. It is indicated to take effect if adopted July 1st of this year, that we would shift and that staff would no longer duly notice its committee meetings as special board meetings. What that would mean is that only the chair and vice chair of those committees would attend the committee meetings, and other directors who are interested could attend in the audience or on Zoom, not as a board participant, and could not comment or discuss the items that were being presented to the committee. With that, we're also proposing the implementation of an exception to the dual noticing for times when there are significant or really substantive issues to be brought forward through the committee process. And it would make sense then to duly notice. We would want to endeavor, as it states, to give board members at least a month's notice so that schedules could be adjusted, because folks might, if we no longer duly notice, might adjust their schedules in the opposite direction. And those situations would come about through collaboration between the general manager, primarily, and the chair of the committee, in considering what's on the upcoming agenda and whether it warrants a dual noticing. So the other piece of this is to have all committee meetings continue to be recorded as they are now, to continue to be available virtually to the public to participate in those meetings. And then we would also, as we've kind of noted on our agenda, we have a little bit of a breakout now for board committee reports that identifies just a tad more room for a report from the committee chair to the board, and maybe some questions and issues of concern or areas where there is more information that would be wanted by any of the board directors. So we've put that in place regardless, but that I think is also written into this proposal. So with that, I will turn it over to the board for discussion and consideration, and I'll be here for questions, of course.
Thank you, Molly. I know you've been navigating a lot of input over multiple discussions on this. So thank you for bringing it all together with this proposal. Open it up for board discussion. Larry, I know you had some comments you wanted to make.
I do. I don't understand the value of the proposal. In my opinion, it's a solution looking for a problem. I believe that my fellow board members still have a lot to learn and need the exposure of these full board committee meetings to learn that information. In my opinion, continuing the current approach results in a no harm, no foul. And it's a good thing based on my experience. My fellow board members and I would be relegated to watching the meeting from the audience, unable to participate. And being I'm the only one that's ever done that here, it is not a fun environment. You sit out there and you can't talk. You can ask a question like any other citizen, but you cannot engage in a discussion. If you guys are worried about how it looks when you do not attend a scheduled meeting, realize that the impact is the same under the old and the new committee approach, in that you are being deprived of the committee information by your absence, and thereby depriving your constituents of the information presented at the committee meeting. The primary purpose of this practice is to avoid having extremely long board meetings by allowing in-depth discussion of the board in the committee meetings. I would say this would be a short meeting if we change this policy, based on my experience. We were clocking into 5-hour and 6-hour meetings straight, back to back, month to month. The purpose of the committees is to provide maximum transparency and completeness. They're not intended to be efficient committee time management efforts. So those are my thoughts. I'm sure you can see where I'm headed on this. I just don't see the value of changing it. I think it works very well, and I think it has served us well. So that's where I'm coming from.
Thanks, Larry. No obfuscation there. I'll just open it up. Whoever wants to, I think we just have a good discussion on this one. Whoever wants to respond.
I can go next and do a little yin to your yang. Yes, we can talk about this, but yeah, I don't disagree with a lot of what you're saying. I think that the experience of doing what we've done for the past almost 18 months now has been very helpful, especially being a new board member. But I think, I could also follow Ben around all day, every day of the week too, and get really up to speed. And I think at that point for me, I think the committees are well designed to allow the subject matter experts, those who are appointed by the president, to really dive in deep and really do the due diligence and homework so that we can get a really good understanding from your perspective on that. Looking at specifically with you, the operations committee, as the chair, I've learned quite a bit from your responses from that, and I would definitely continue to appreciate that. But for me, I think that the committee assignments really allow those board members to go and dig deep and do that piece and then come back and report back to the full board on what's going on with that. So I'm in support of going back to the other format because I think it's an efficient way to do things. I know that, a long board meeting is not what everyone likes, but it's either that or it's spread out over the course of a month, almost the same amount of time. So it's 6 of one, half to the other. So I think there is some benefit of doing it that way too. And it's a system that I've been used to for my current job, and understanding that I look around this dais and we've got some really well-educated folks that have a lot of good expertise that I definitely trust and would love to allow them to dig deep and have these really deep discussions at a committee meeting where it's a little less formal, and we're allowed to really spend some time picking things apart so that we can give good recommendations to the full board.
I mean, I've expressed my opinions in the last meeting. I'd love to hear Monty. I haven't heard your thoughts. I have some additional ones since then. And if you don't want to, I can go next.
If you want me to go, I think, I think I feel somewhat like how Larry feels, which is I'm not sure what the problem is that we're trying to solve with this. Ultimately, I think that there are, the discussions, when I just look at the committee meetings that we've had recently, like everybody, there's a lot of discussion. And so and if there was silence, if it was a lot of like crickets and we'd show up and the committee chair guides the meeting and there was no dialogue and conversation or questions, I would be like, maybe we don't need to have everybody because it's not fruitful. But the opposite is what I see happening, is that there's a lot of dialogue, and so I think there is a lot of learning. I think it could be, I wonder whether part of the challenges that there are sometimes when there are committee meetings where there's there's not as much interest by the non-committee members to all the things that are there, and maybe a solution might be that there's there's not an obligation. If you're not a committee chair or co-chair, you don't need to show up. Maybe that it eases up some of the burden on calendars and other things. I mean, I know this is like a conversation that's like it's like the e-bike issue. It's like it comes up constantly. I'm game to go sort of either way, and I would maybe propose trying it and seeing like did this turn into mega long board meetings, at night, or do we find, as Molly, you've got a provision in there which is like we periodically will have committee meetings that are special, and then we will notice them. Well, we don't often know what the agenda is of a committee meeting very far in advance. So I think planning ahead that might be a good outcome of that. But who's to say, I mean, when we see the topics that come up on our committee meetings, again, given how much dialogue I always see, it feels like they're almost always of interest. So I'm amenable. I feel like there's a desire to see what it looks like, but I think I'm not sure what the problem is where we don't have good conversations as it is anyway. So
yeah, I think when we brought this up at the last TAC meeting, I was thinking kind of along your lines, Monty, and similar to what you said, Larry. But I recognize that I didn't make the next committee meeting, and it is a challenge for me to attend every committee meeting now. Longer board meetings that are regularly scheduled are actually a better situation for me. I actually did watch the video of the meeting that I missed, so I felt like it was a great meeting. On your you had recommended that we pick up that topic, and I think I was able to, I didn't miss out entirely on the learning. I think just given those experiences of how I'm engaging with things, my own preference for having fewer meetings, but potentially longer ones, as you've noted, Larry, And also the flexibility that we're provided if we are able to dual notice when there is a topic of that, that really demands everybody's attention. I think given all that, I'm in favor of, as you said, Monty, trying this, a change in the dual noticing.
I'm curious, Molly, Ben, your thoughts about this proposal. In many ways, it does reflect a lot of the things I said in the last meeting. But I'm curious about your thoughts about why it's better. And I am struck by the depth of engagement that this board has in our committee meetings and the learning that we are all having, regardless of whether we're new or not. We're all learning and we're all participating and learning from each other. And so I do think that having our level of participation is helpful in many, many ways. And that, if we go to having the level of conversation and discourse to solely be at the, every other week board meetings, will all the staff have to show up that were at those previous committee meetings so that we can ask questions in depth, because they're typically not here for the board meeting. So, we don't have Paul Cellier here, right now, and there may have been a committee meeting. He'd have to be showing up on the Tuesday nights, and then we can go into depth about those meetings. So, I do think there is value to having our conversation, and I'm just curious about the benefit that you guys see in doing it this way. And I also, I think it's important to realize that we are unique. So this is somewhat unusual to do it the way that we have been doing it. And so there should be a really good reason. The really good reason seems to me that we're really engaged. There's a lot of benefit from it. And it's almost like, why doesn't everybody do it this way? But it's a lot of work, I think. And I do know some people that wanted to run for this seat, this office, who didn't because we have so many meetings. They just can't do it. So I'm curious about your thoughts about why this is what you proposed. And I have one other suggestion, but yeah, first back to you.
Well, I'll weigh in first, and then I'm sure our general manager has some thoughts. And in particular, I think he can speak better to, the staffing at the committee meetings versus board meetings. If we were to go in this direction, I'm used to how we've been doing it the time that I've been here at the district. I would say there are definitely pros and cons, like all of you were sort of, weighing tonight. So I don't think I have, a very strong, it must be this or that. I think it is unusual for an agency to have multiple board meetings a month, essentially, and that's what we're doing. And I think sometimes it is confusing because, we call them committee meetings, but really there are multiple board meetings per month.
But we don't take actions.
Typically, right. No,
So
the
it's
policies.
not quite
Well,
truthful.
as far as legal quorums are
We
concerned, right?
could,
Sure.
but we don't.
Right, because the board has intentionally opted into a policy not to because of the unusual nature, I think, of the meeting structure. And, I think it's hard to know for this body, all of you, to the other, how the function would be if we only had committee meeting notices and not dual committee notices. I don't
think it's hard at all.
Well,
I mean,
okay, this is just my opinion.
But
Larry, I don't want.
But I have been the one that's been through it.
Sure, I think you've been through it, but everybody else, hasn't had that experience. I've had a prior experience in another organization that had committee meetings, and it was just a different functionality. It was, you had a smaller group, you had a little more back and forth interaction, I think, with staff, and a less of a formal, board setting. I'm just giving you my, kind of factual perspective experience. So I think I'll let Ben weigh in now at this point.
Can I just on that one point? There's this mention of like a less formal setting, but is it really going to look and feel any different than it currently does? I mean, it would still be on Zoom. It would still have, I mean, I'm not sure we have any,
Says we don't have a quorum of the board. I mean,
but,
we
but
have
does
two
that,
members, and so it's a little bit of a different the level of formality. I think when you have two members in a meeting, even if it's in a formal setting, is just different. I don't know. I'm maybe not explaining it well, but yeah, Ben may be able to do better.
So your question is, so I wanted to understand it, Monty. It's
my question is, so I'm focused on what is the benefit of having people together. And if it's the informational value is what is the thing I've been focused on all along. That again, like I said, if we had these committee meetings and there wasn't ongoing dialogue, among board members and with the staff, if I felt like it was impeding dialogue or sharing of information, that would concern me. I see the opposite happening. I get in real time get to hear opinions from other board members as well as staff. I don't see it that having committee meetings where all the board members or most of them has impeded that. So when there's a reference to having a smaller meeting that might facilitate or enable a more robust discussion, I'm not sure that that if that's true, that would sway me, but I'm not sure I've ever seen things be impeded by the presence of more board members.
Yeah. So my view in responding to this and Director Smith's question is, I don't see a relative benefit of either model. Been here 5 years. This has worked. And 30 some years at 3 other public agencies in the other model that has also worked. And they both work well. So to me, this is really, I was impressed for what it's worth with the discussion of the board. And to me, that's really where this rests. We ask a lot from the board, this organization does, and you have to decide the best way to manage that on your end in context of this discussion, in my view. But I do want to assure you, for what it's worth, from my experience and my opinion, it will work. I do think the point that Director Russell brought up is probably for me the most real, of an element of awkwardness, I suppose, sitting there as a board member. At East Bay Mud, it's the other model, not common, but you wouldn't be surprised to see a board member sit in the audience because there's a particular interest in the topic. So that would often occur, or questions would come to staff on a topic that came to a committee meeting. So this has worked well. I guess if I were on the dais, I'd be maybe more of a traditionalist, and I'm not sure why. But I just have worked under the other model for so long, and it works. And I do think, Monty, Director Smith, there is an element of a decrease in formality when we just don't have the full body in front of us as staff. And it will tend over time, not overnight, not in a few, but over time, in my experience, to be a bit more roll up the sleeves back and forth, digging deeper in. But I appreciate all the comments, and I really, 6 of one, half a dozen from a staff view.
Yeah, I think I'm going to come out not fully supportive of the language in the proposal and another tweak maybe, but I think it's an important one. That rather than have us go to the norm of our committee meetings being committee meetings and not special board meetings, I'd rather keep the norm that we have it, but have the ability for the general manager and the chair of a committee to suggest that it is not a special meeting of the board. There are definitely meetings that are literally report outs that we don't need to have everyone here. And I would flip it to be not the norm rather than the norm. That's a suggestion.
Not quite sure I understand what you're saying.
We had a finance report meeting. It was about an hour. We all looked at the financials. We had a couple of questions. There was no big decisions. It was just literally here's what's going on. It was a report. In my mind, we don't need to have, 5 directors getting paid $200 to be there. That you can watch that, you can see it, and you can participate.
Well, my concern remains the same. What is going to happen is if I'm faced with the consent calendar, I will likely ask all of them to be taken off the consent calendar because I have no other way of judging it. I have no other way of participating except to bring it up in the board meeting and to cause it to be fully discussed in the board meeting. So I see it, having been the only person here from the board standpoint who's been both ways, I think this is so much superior to the other way. And I think that if East Bay Mud or whoever would try it, they would like it because it's not just awkward sitting in the audience. The audience turns around to you and starts asking you questions. As a non-participatory board member, it is a awkward, to say the least, situation. But that is not the benefit or the problem. The benefit is in the board meetings. You guys, I understand if you don't have the time to go to a meeting, then don't come. It's not a big deal. I mean, it's not going to, no one's, once they kept track of this. I don't think they keep track anymore. There was a fight about it. And at one point they kept track of the board members' attendance. But it doesn't make any difference, and if it doesn't fit your schedule, then that's fine. It doesn't fit your schedule. I find, I bend my schedule to match the board meetings because I think it's important for the 25,000 people we represent, for us to be here and have our 2 bits. But like I say, I will almost automatically ask all the consent calendar items to be taken off. Because how can you vote yes on a consent calendar if you haven't been party to the discussion? I mean, we probably have too much of that already. Too many things that are on that, in my opinion, I was trained that to put it on the consent calendar, it has to have a public discussion in a committee meeting. That's the way it got to the consent calendar. There are items on the consent calendar that I don't ever see going through public discussion, I think.
I don't think.
Oh, yeah.
Nothing I've seen.
Well, hiring is one. Those types of things that are on there.
Right. That was based on, a discussion with the board.
I'm just saying.
But that I do think is the exception. Nothing else, that did come to mind when you said it, but nothing else did. I think that may be it.
I would like to just follow up because I think, the consent calendar piece is a real a benefit in the current way we do it. I would probably mention that most of the consent items come from out of operations. And so you probably wouldn't be pulling a lot of them.
Yes.
But the other thing is we have staff reports, and boards put stuff on consent calendar all the time that aren't discussed at a committee level. And so we have a detailed staff report looking it over. And if there's an issue, if can't be answered by staff prior to, there's always the ability to pull it as well. So
Yeah, but what I'm saying, Matt, is I would ask to pull them all, more than likely. You're right. If the ones that come out of operations, it's not an issue, except that you guys, if you're not there, you haven't heard it. And how can you vote yes on the consent calendar if you haven't been party to the discussion?
I guess
you can, but it's kind of ill-informed, huh?
No, I hear what you're saying. Sorry, Monty, just going to finish up real quick. But I think then the model you're pointing to with that logic is that we've got board meetings all month long, right? The committee meetings aren't committee meetings. They're board meetings on a certain topic. And so I guess the question becomes then, what's the point of a committee chair?
Well, that's a much more
But
complicated.
I guess that's where structurally for me, that's what one of the reasons for wanting to look at the more classical model is allow the committees to do the committee work. But I hear what you're saying.
Let me just respond to that one. Because it's all new to you guys, and it's good you take this serious, the committee assignments, that's basically from my 20 years on the board. a chore, not a pleasure. And you could see what normally happens. Everybody happy? We'll just leave it the way it is. Because changing it is a very emotional thing. It can be, depending on who wants to do what. If you get into a fight about it, I mean, there was a policy that has been most of the time I've been on the board is that the president of the board does not chair any committees. That's most of the time I've been on the board. Now that got bent around a little bit, partly in COVID, but it was before that actually that it changed. I've stayed both as president and chair of the operations committee. When I joined the board, my predecessor, Dick Hill, and I met, and Dick told me that all the action here is in the operations committee. So what that operations committee does is absolutely directly shorten these board meetings. And, I understand that schedules, it may be easier for you to do a long board meeting. I don't think we would be starting at 6:30. I think we'd be starting at 4:30. Okay, just conceptually, because it's going to go like it can 6 hours, 7 hours. And trust me, if you get one of these where we have 25 people, not 12 or 45 people, you throw that in the middle. I mean, we've actually truncated meetings. That's another policy that you can put in that does work is we go to 11 o'clock and would stop. And if we're not done at 11, then it picks up on the next board meeting. That's another way of handling the problem. But like I say, I just don't see the value in changing it, as I've said, because if you can't make it, you can't make it. I mean, it's no different than anything else,
What is staff perceptions around the risks of having overly long board meetings if we change? And some of you have to, drive a lot further than us to get home.
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, I can't speak for all staff, of course, but, attending board meetings twice a month is part of the job of senior management, of the general manager. And, some of us have experienced working in cities where it does start at 4:30 and goes, if you're out by 11, you're feeling good. But the topics, it's very different what drives those sorts of meetings, intractable, brutal issues and protests. And I haven't seen that in the other model of where I've worked. And yeah, I don't want to kind of weigh in and support one or the other, because really I just feel like this is best really a board decision of how you want to manage the information and governance of this institution.
Matt, I think you had the strongest arguments to do away with dual noticing. The rest of us seem to be falling somewhere in the middle. Do you have Larry's arguments and other comments, swayed you in this?
They started to, Larry. No, but I say that because there are two sides. There are multiple perspectives here, and I want to respect everyone's perspective while doing this. I still would like to see the classic model, and that's me because I'd like to be able to get down in the weeds in the committee meetings, look at committee chairs setting agendas a little bit more, getting some things through, and then being able to report out on those committee meetings. And if something to get pulled, definitely at that point, it'd be a public comment or a open discussion and be able to report back as the committee chair from that. But I still stand there.
I wonder whether something that would help address some of this is that if you look at if a board member looks at the agenda of a committee meeting and doesn't see something on there that is going to be of issue and concern, and something that, to Larry's point, if you don't show up and you can't participate in a conversation, then you might be inclined to pull it from the consent calendar. Maybe that's a trigger for showing up, and being there, so that we do have the benefit of not having more lengthy meetings. And if there isn't something on a committee meeting, agenda that is of interest, or that you can't, garner enough information from, either the reports or watching on Zoom, then you don't need to show up. And maybe that makes it easier, because it is challenging sometimes to make it to all the meetings that are in the middle of the day if you have a regular work job schedule. And I have that experience myself too. So maybe that makes it a little bit easier, but I'm mindful that it is a challenge for a lot of folks, and that it can be a barrier for participation on the board, which I'm mindful of. That's important to also address.
Yeah, I think I just hate to get too much of a gray area. And the comment I used at the last FAC meeting was, having to get a rubric on which meetings we're going to go to and not, or dual notice. And I think to keep it simple, I think we should go either way. I don't know if a hybrid really is a solution here. I think that's a hybrid is kind of like a solution looking for a problem a little bit, to steal some words from fellow board members tonight. So I think for me, it would be either one or the other. That's where I think is the easiest way to do it.
I mean, we've been in the current model with the new board members now for a little over a year. It doesn't seem unreasonable to try something, I know, Larry, you're smiling because once you put something in motion, it never changes.
That's not why I'm smiling. It's already been tried. That's
right. But I mean, we're different people, right? Obviously, we're a different board, so we may respond differently than your past experience. I think it's reasonable to evaluate. We could do a 3-month trial, a 6-month trial, and see how.
Well, let me toss out another alternative. I don't know if there are certain committees that would be different. I think that might be the case. The ones that meet less frequently, I think it's actually more important, like watershed and those, for all of us to be there. But I absolutely guarantee you're talking about doubling the length of the board meetings. That's a given in my thinking, because like I said, how can you vote for something that you haven't participated in the conversation about? It's very difficult, not impossible, but very difficult. And the finance one is an interesting question. I'll be frank, it's the one I enjoy the least. Probably.
I'll work on it.
No, it's not because of you. It's the information. It is a frustrating one, because I don't know why this is, and maybe Brett's better, but it always seems to change at the last second. I never understood that, why we couldn't get the slides ahead of time for that one. I never got that. But it always seemed to be the case that they always came in with some change. And I'm thinking, like, what can it be a change? I mean, that's the one that should be the easiest, it would think to me, to cast that one in concrete. But, so maybe there's another third option, which is some are and some aren't.
I'm going to push that we do a trial of eliminating dual noticing. We agree at this point to trial it for 3 months or 6 months, and we evaluate the experiences following that, and determine if we want to go to a hybrid or back to the full dual noticing. I can't make a motion, but I'll suggest that as a way forward.
What do you think, Jed?
What were you saying, Molly?
It was a point of order that the president of the board typically doesn't make a motion. So I think he's looking for someone to make the motion.
Got it. So moved.
No second, it dies. Not pushing one way or the other, but that's how the rules are.
I find myself wanting to, I like trying new things. And so I find myself wanting to try something, but I also wonder whether there is, going forward for the next couple of months, because this wouldn't even kick in until July 1, whether we just treat it this way. I mean, again, committee meetings, you don't need to show up.
Well, you never needed to show up.
If you're not on the committee.
Yeah, you never needed to.
And so we don't need to even do anything different. You just don't come.
Even the chair and the vice chair don't need to show up. It's just conventional that you do.
Well, I'm not suggesting that
but there's no obligation.
Sure. But I don't know. I mean, I'm trying, I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave the two of you hanging. You can't make the motion, and
Take it personally if you leave me hanging.
I know you won't. We're all bigger than that, but I'm trying I'm interested to see what it does do and to create that flexibility.
Then you should second it, and we have a vote, and the vote will determine what we do.
Well, I guess I'm trying to make almost a second motion, which is like,
Oh, that's different.
which is just just opt to behave that way. Whether you if you're not on the committee, you don't show up.
I mean, I think it's a very fair point, Monty, but honestly, if something is noticed as a special board meeting, as a board member, I think it would be, certainly we've all missed, meetings, including full board meetings on occasion, but to not make that effort to show up to special board meeting would start to feel, I think, a little negligent. There really is an implication that if it's a board meeting, you should try to be there. So I think that's my concern with saying.
I
just
think
don't
that may
show
be a
up.
misconception, very frankly. What do you think, Molly?
I think that if it's a personal decision, but obviously if it's noticed as a special board meeting, the intent is that it's available for all board members to show up.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean it's obligatory.
We don't have a process or procedure, I believe, in the board handbook or otherwise that makes it obligatory. I think you're responsible to yourself and your constituents in the district.
But that's always the case. The problem is that, as I said, you folks haven't set out there. It is, you almost chomping at the bit, but you can't say anything. You're just, I mean, I assume, because now one thing I will say, which argues actually, in my opinion, for leaving it the way it is that when most of the time I've been on the board, we haven't had the video. So the video is new. That you had a tape. That's quite an experience. Listening to 3 hours of tape to get to the part you're interested in. And you actually got the tapes from the board secretary physically and put them in a tape recorder and played the tape. You didn't have to sit in front of her and play the tape, but you had to, play it on your own. And, it bore on your patience, I can tell you. So it's easier with the Zoom. That's a twist that I haven't experienced except for this part. So, you can listen, but it's not really much better than the tape. It's the same idea. It's just a different form of that same kind of communication. So,
But I guess I don't really appreciate the risk of trying something, and if we're not comfortable, we go back. But if we're not able to get a second on that, then I'm gonna say, I don't know, just to move on, I'm gonna say we just table this and
well, that's what
come back to
happens.
it.
That happens regardless. So if there's no second, it's dead.
Well, yeah, but then, Sorry.
I think he can second if he wishes to.
I think, sure, I think if there's a first, if there's a motion and then nobody else wants to second it, I mean, I think the implication is that if no one else wants to second it, it's likely to fail the vote, but.
I think that's accurate.
I mean, I would, I mean, I know this has been a longstanding conversation. This comes back over and over again. I would benefit from some time to think about all the points that I've heard, and I might suggest kicking this. I don't want to say kicking the can. I think this has been one of the most. I don't want to say well, it's not contentious at all. Most interesting conversation that the board has ever had about trying to hear and understand differing perspectives about the way we work on things, and I want to give some thought to the comments that have been made. So my preference would actually be to hold this over until our next meeting.
With that said, I just give you the information. I have probably spent 3 hours outside of this meeting on this subject, either talking to Molly or thinking about it, or you seen how many times I ever have written out what I'm going to say before I do it?
I noticed that, Larry. I did notice that you went on a script, and I knew that this meant a lot to you because of that. But
it actually, Monty, it means less to me. I'm forewarning you of what happens. Okay, like I said, go to Larkspur City Council meeting. 3 a.m. is typical. From start time at like 6, 7, they go for 6.5 hours. That is the problem.
So I'll suggest, Molly, is there a way we can just take this off the agenda for now? And I'm going to suggest, Monty, we don't come back to it next meeting. Honestly, maybe we can hold off again for 6 months or something. Just take a break.
I'm just gonna make one comment. So I do think that we do not need to have special board meetings every single committee meeting. And I'd like us to consider how to limit them somehow. Some of these committee meetings do not need to be special board meetings of Marin Water. So the norm of going to just committee meetings, I'm not supportive of this resolution. But I would like us to think about how we can
I
further look at whether it's specific meetings or specific committees.
I
think
do
we can-
have a
we can
thought
do it,
based
yeah.
on this discussion.
Ben, can I just say,
Sure,
I
yeah,
just
of
want to be
course.
clear too. I'm with Jed on this, and I like the idea of change. I too don't think that every single committee meeting needs the full board attendance, and so that's why I'm stuck, because I don't want it. I like this discussion. I like what we're trying to do, and I'm looking for a hybrid approach. And so it's
I think we had a proposal for a hybrid approach, right? Where the committee chair and the general manager would determine if something moves up to a special board meeting or not. You don't like it. I think, Jen, I'm a little less actually comfortable with, we're regularly, these are now special board meetings. And then, I get an email saying, don't bother showing up. That I think I'm less comfortable with.
So if I could, trying to thread the needle may or may not work. There was some discussion on finance, and I do think that's an option. You pick one committee. Maybe it's finance, because finance does, I think, have clarity to some extent of it's just routine update. No, this meeting, we're going to be talking about updating our capacity fees. So that meeting has clarity, and I feel it'd probably be a reasonable place to pilot for, an extended period, 6 months or a year or something, and just try out one committee, see how it feels. It's, lower risk, much less, potential impact. So anyway. Or we just move on.
Could we, I mean, if we work out, it seems like what's being proposed would result at a minimum of working out the agenda for a committee meeting in advance of what we have. I mean, I think that I'm going to go on that as an assumption. So a benefit of this would be working out our agendas in advance. And what if there was you know, if they're worked out at least 2 weeks in advance, that the board members could say, I don't, there's not an agenda item on there that I'm significantly interested in. And unless you have a quorum, you don't make it a special board meeting.
I mean, that's essentially what we do now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, other than, you know, maybe the timing on the agenda itself, but the agenda is in development for a period of time and we have a posting requirement, but I'm not sure how that would change our policy direction. We would always be noticing every meeting as it.
I think Monty's talking about something a little different
Yeah.
than that.
Yeah.
He's talking about a more integrated.
Yeah,
approach.
it's with the finance committee, we, at the chair's request, we sat down and we mapped out 6 months tentative topics. And there's another reason I thought finance would work, because we kind of have that. And right, the chair and I would look, and I think it would work. I think on the fly, I understand the proposal. That seems logistically challenging to just make it all work with your schedules and this and the confusion, and that would be a pretty significant increase in staff work.
Well, how much time do you guys spend on the committees? Setting the agendas, just roughly.
Oh, we spend
Hours?
every staff
Every
meeting
Wednesday.
once a
Half the
week.
job, yeah.
What we
Oh,
spend.
I'm not
Oh, it's
questioning.
tremendous.
It's just putting it out there.
2-3 hours every week, but that's just talking about the items and the
Sure,
topics
Sure.
in the,
That's the point I was trying to make.
yeah.
Is that that's the level to be an active participant.
Yeah.
Now you're giving up the one meeting a month for 3 hours a week, you know, to set the agenda on that meeting.
Well, I don't want to sound too rigid or inflexible, but I think where I think it's beneficial that we either go one way or the other. And I think the hybrid approach sounds novel, but when we start looking at it, it's not really going to be the a silver bullet that I think we're hoping for right now. So I think one way or the other would be my recommendation.
I have a question. Is it codified anywhere, what we're doing? Is there like a board policy on this?
It's mentioned in the board handbook that this is what happens. So in a sense, yes.
Do you know when the date of that was?
It was updated in January 2021.
Oh, yeah, but
prior to that, it
long
was
before that.
well, the board handbook was actually adopted in January, I think, or sometime early in 2021, because it's actually shortly after I started with the district that we had adopted the board handbook. We brought it back a few times. And then I believe there was direction on the policy formally at a board meeting in January of 2020. There had been some issues raised by outside parties as to whether it was compliant with the Brown Act. There was a pause and research done by your general counsel at the time, as well as outside attorneys. It was looked at carefully, referred, I think, by the outside people to, or the outside contender, folks that had problems to the district attorney's office. They did not pick it up, and legal research was found that it could be done. And so the board gave that direction just by motion.
So
There's
that's
not a formal.
21.
That was in 2020.
2020.
And then in 2021, the board handbook was adopted, which essentially codified, it
But
was
I
in
think
code,
the
but-
actual event, I think it's like 2008 or something like that. Okay.
I don't know when the practice was started.
Well, normally on those things, it says the date that it was initially on the packet stuff in the board packet. It has the date at the top, and then it says modified. and all
Correct.
that.
If it was as a board policy, I don't know that there was a formal
never
board
got that far.
policy before it was codified in the.
Where I'm headed is this: if there's no policy, then it's really no harm, no foul. Like I say, you may feel that, okay, that you're obligated, but I don't think you are. I don't think we're even obligated. We don't even have procedures. There are boards that say if you miss 2 in a row, but we don't have that because it's not really our business. We're elected by the people, not by the board. So you know, if you were to have a policy that said, if you miss 2 board meetings in a row or whatever, that you're off. Well, you know, that's probably constitutional level.
I've seen that with appointed commissions, for example.
That's different.
But not legislative bodies.
No,
You're correct.
I don't think it's I don't think it's possible because
It's not.
it's a vote to put you in place. And I think if you never came, you know, if there's just an empty chair here, it's just how it is. You know, you might have a tough election the next time, but you know, now with this Zoom stuff, it changes everything again, you know, because you can participate as actively in Zoom as you can sitting here. Although I found it much more complicated to have this conversation from where I was in Honolulu last time than I am here.
I'll suggest I mean, thanks for the suggestion on trying the hybrid approach with the finance meeting, committee meeting, Jed. I know you were potentially interested, but you know, honestly, even if it's short, that's probably after bicycles the topic that I get the most questions about from constituents.
Yeah.
So
Which is finance.
Rates.
Finance.
But you know, where's the money going?
Yeah.
How much water are we using? I just find it critical information. So I'm going to suggest again that Molly, we take it off the table, and I will ask for, you know, a good 6 months or so before we bring it back. Just to take, because I know you're now in the kind of this hamster wheel of responding to, you know, one more meeting type.
It is always up to the board to decide that they want to hear it again.
Yep.
So it's a, you know, request and a second, and I can bring it back. It's a board policy practice. So it's at any time it can be redirected.
Well, thank you for doing the homework. Thank you for doing the research. Thank you for being bold and putting something forward. Thank you for actually listening to me and putting forward what I was suggesting. Sorry if I turned, you know, I wouldn't say a full 180, but this healthy conversation, I think was good. And Matt, I completely hear your perspective. This is an unusual practice. I do think there are ways that it is serving us well, and I'm sure it'll come up again.
And I think with that, public comments.
Yes, Mr. Phil Sauter.
Take your man, Phil.
Well, actually, I'm on the downswing of patience. This has actually been one of the most remarkable discussions that I've heard since attending these board meetings. I think it was only Director Russell who visualized what it's like to sit in the audience and be impotent. Add a 3-minute bell to that, and welcome to my world. I find that I've been attending most, and actually I do have to say that I was surprised that the board president, who is my district representative, was willing to vote on this, or push for a vote, I think was the word, before hearing public comment, as opposed to having public comment come after the vote. I've liked to feel that the board has traditionally been open to public comment. I've come to most board meetings and feel listened to, and if not respected, at least tolerated. I come to about half of the committee meetings because sometimes we can go a couple of months without getting to the demand management or conservation issue that I'm interested in. To attend a committee meeting with 2 people, I have no idea. I have no benefit to know how the other 3 members are thinking. I have no idea, no way to make my comments known during one of those committee meetings in a way that would impact more than 2 people. I think if you were to have passed this, or if you pass it in the future, I think I ask you to consider what kind of message you're sending to the public, whether you like robust public participation, or if you'd like to further limit it by reducing opportunities to have an interchange between the full board and the public. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was such a pleasure for me to have people in the audience speak up tonight, as opposed to the Zoom.
Yeah, the other board members haven't seen that, and when we do 100 people, like we did for that tank, then they'll have the pleasure of seeing what an engaged community looks like.
The bicycle one the other night was pretty heavy.
Okay.
Yeah, you missed that one.
There's one more speaker. Jack, please.
having attended many meetings both this year and a couple years ago back in 2022, as someone in the audience, both on the computer as well as in person, I can say something that is very challenging about being in the audience is sometimes a topic that is extremely fascinating and important to me, where I have a lot to say about it, I can't say anything. And it can be extremely easy to get distracted from what's going on in the meeting and start thinking off about what's seemingly interesting and important to me. Like I was certainly focused on that bike topic after Ranjiv brought it up, especially given I heard from a cyclist himself about how rampant of an issue illegal trail cycling is. So yeah, that's my input as a regular audience member.
Thank you. There are no further speakers.
Okay, then we'll move to item 10, future board and committee meetings and upcoming agenda items.
Good evening, Board of Directors. I'm just going to point out a few of the items for upcoming internal meetings and external meetings. Next week, on Thursday, April 25th, there is a there's an FAC meeting in the morning. One of the key items is the quarterly HR update. Later that evening, later that day in the evening at 6 p.m. is a closed session. So there are 2 meetings that day. The following week, there are 2 back-to-back meetings. April 30th, 6:30 is our regular board meeting. There's a public hearing on the Phoenix Bond Tempe Connection Project, and there is a closed session afterwards. So I believe those are claims, if I'm not mistaken. Then the following day, 5 p.m., May 1st, is a special meeting regarding the Water Efficiency Master Plan Study Session. Also, this coming Friday is the North Bay Watershed Association Conference. So just want to remind people that the conference is there and you should have your tickets. And I'll stop there. If you have any questions or if you want to bring any items up, please let me know. I already emailed them to you.
No other comments then. Thanks a lot, Terry. And with the meeting of April 16th, 2024 is adjourned.